Ανάστασε εδώ.
Well, Charles, little Greek interlude there. Welcome to Sunday.
It's great to be back with you.
Yeah, likewise, likewise. You know, before we get into the presentation, there were a couple things I wanted to go over. First of all, earlier in the week, Laura mentioned this. I was at James O'Keefe's book event, and it was a beautiful event. James's new book is American Pravda, and they were talking all about their expose of Twitter. And I personally think they've done quite a lot of very important work. I had him sign this copy for you, Charles.
Oh, you're too kind.
You know,
Thank you.
I wanted to...
James is a great man, and he's got a wonderful organization. My God, thank you so much.
My pleasure. And I'm sure you'll have a lot of wonderful insights once you read that. The other thing I wanted to talk about real briefly is that, you know, just yesterday, and I did a bit of a bad job in covering this, but just yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the inauguration of Donald Trump.
That's true. That's true.
And it's also, we're just around the 1-year anniversary of Crowdsource the Truth.
Oh, really?
I started Crowdsource the Truth in about October of 2016 because I was so disgusted with all the fake news being shared on social media. And I felt that we all have kind of a renewed responsibility. You know, back in the day, you really couldn't share your views with thousands of people with the click of a button. And so there's a certain amount of responsibility, I feel, that comes with that we all owe it to our friends and family to check carefully before we spread information. So that got me thinking about that a little bit. And of course, I started out as a Bernie supporter, but what
now you tell me.
Well, you knew that. You knew that. But what we're learning in part from Jan Weinberg and some of the other things is that maybe Bernie wasn't this shining beacon of hope that we all thought. And I mean, you know, after he got knocked out by the lying, cheating Clinton machine, Donald Trump's call to drain the swamp really resonated with me. And hopefully that's happening now in part to the work that you've been doing and that you've allowed me to assist you with. Michael Smith, of course, has submitted a formal complaint to the FBI on behalf of the Australian government.
Exactly. Well, first, congratulations on keeping Crowdsource the Truth open on its first anniversary. Unlike Donald Trump, unfortunately, he couldn't get it done down in Washington.
Well, he's still working.
But you're not working against Chuck Schumer, so yeah.
You know, I did have that encounter with Chuck Schumer on the Amtrak train, which was very funny. But the thing about the first year of Crowdsource the Truth, the reason why I wanted to bring it up was that the first year was really, for me, a test of, you know, is this something that people are even interested in? You know, doing this sort of crowdsource fact checking. You know, people call and email all the time saying, hey, you got this wrong, you got that wrong, you should have this person on, you should have that person on. And we're constantly trying to refine and improve what we're doing. But, you know, after going from basically 0 viewers to 44,000 in just over a year, that was amazing for me. And before we get underway, I want to remind everybody that Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored news resource. So instead of taking funding from huge advertisers or being owned by a corporation or a foreign intelligence service, we rely on the same source of the information, the crowdsource community, to sponsor the channel. And I just want to ask people to consider going on to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And if you find yourself watching weekly or daily, even $1 a month, $5 a month, this is really a small amount when you consider the amount of time that somebody might be spending watching. If you are watching daily and you're not a sponsor, you know, you got to think about that, because we need to keep the lights on, we need to keep the show going, and I appreciate everything that you've been doing, Charles, in helping me continue to do that. So 2018 will be the year that sort of the second year of my startup business here, and you know, most startups that I've been involved in actually lose money for quite some time during the first year. So here in the second year, if it can be a financially viable business, that'll be a good indicator that we'll be able to carry on. Well,
and congratulations to you. I mean, we're going to go over metrics, I think, after the show, and there are some great metrics for the business types out there. You're getting, I think you just said you have 9 million views.
Total views, yeah.
And many of your shows are, you know, lengthy.
Yeah.
Not to mention this show, but
Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to tell you. I did look at the average view duration, and it's going up. The last time you and I checked it, it was 12 minutes, and now it's gone up to 19 minutes.
That's long.
That is for YouTube. So without further ado, we should possibly get right into the matter of somebody's big fat grifter wedding.
Yeah. I mean, this, first of all, the art department, again, I mean, you got to pay those people more. This is just fantastic work. And I don't know if you saw the film, the first film.
I did.
Yeah, I actually thought it was one of the funnier films out there. I have some excellent, long-standing friends from Greece, some of whom are still Greek and others are Greek American. But this film in particular was hysterically funny.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't see any Windex bottles around right now, but it was very, very funny. And the lectures you get about the influence of Athenian and early Greek history on the world are fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But
and sorry, Charles, the other thing I wanted to remind people of is that if they aren't already following you on Twitter, they can just follow you there at Charles Ortel. And you have been tweeting up a storm. Your Twitter following is growing tremendously, and that's great news.
well, thank you for all your support, and also, I mean, thanks to all the people in Crowdsource the Truth who are increasingly now reaching out with good ideas and suggestions that are sent to me either via my site or via this Twitter account. Thanks for following me.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for watching the show. Thanks for suggesting ideas. And I think today, actually, we're going to have some requests to the viewers for specific things.
I like that because, you know, it really struck me that when you sent me that link, I think it was in Zero Hedge, which is really nice because you're always talking about Zero Hedge, so I guess they're watching what we're doing on this show. And when we had Michael Smith on as a guest, am I wrong to say that there's a direct correlation between that Croc-a-Dung Down Under show and Michael submitting this formal request to the FBI?
I think there's an absolutely direct request. And actually, that brings up an important point. I worked briefly for a Japanese firm that no longer exists, but it was very famous when I was working there, called the Industrial Bank of Japan. It was the entity that after World War II was organized to basically bring Japan up from the rubble. And the firm I worked for first out of business school, Dillon Reed, made a name in quotes for itself by being the first major underwriting firm to underwrite debt for Japan after World War II. And that was somewhat shocking because most of the underwriting firms didn't think too highly of Japan after Pearl Harbor, et cetera. And by dint of that gesture, the Japanese were really appreciative of Dillon Reed, and and this Industrial Bank of Japan had very strong connections as a result of decades of work building the miracle in Japan. And so I learned a lot when I left Dillon Reed to then go work for the Industrial Bank of Japan in a boutique. And an important phrase that I learned it's a funny phrase, it's called nemawashi. And what nemawashi means, if you ever go and look at a Japanese rock garden or one of those miniature gardens, it means, effectively, it was explained to me, it means preparing the ground. And that's what we've been doing, you and I, before I met you, that I was doing with my friends around the world. We saw this coming. We saw, Michael Smith as an example. We'll have Fabien Chalandon, who was keenly interested in coming on, I think 2 weeks if that'll work, and others. We've been in correspondence, detailed correspondence, waiting to see what would happen in the election and waiting to see how long it would take for President Trump to get his people in and what the resistance would be like. And we've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and there comes a time to strike. It doesn't make sense to throw all your heavy artillery against the Clintons when they may well be in the White House. So I held back.
Right.
In particular, in September of 2016, I was to a point where I was going to release a lot of detail, and that's when I stopped trusting. I actually stopped trusting Jim Comey before that, but I stopped trusting the FBI leadership, the Department of Justice leadership, and I didn't want to lay my cards out on the table at that point. So, long answer to your short question is that I think Michael Smith has done a tremendous amount of work. You can go on his site; it's a wonderful site, Michael Smith News. And how are you, mate? But he's a very detail-oriented, highly experienced former police detective, and who knows how to write and knows how to do good work. And so the existence of this now FBI and Australian government inquiry is not an accident. Michael Smith has really been doing yeoman's work around the world. Wow.
That's him, right?
Yeah, I hadn't seen this latest story. I'll have to read it afterwards. But so yeah, what we're beginning to see is now that it is definitely confirmed that there has been a mature IRS investigation that started early started in by July 2016. Now that it is clear the FBI field offices and now the main people at the FBI and main people at Justice and the U.S. Attorney in Little Rock and maybe also in the Eastern District of New York, now that it's become clear that our federal authorities are going after the Clinton Foundation, then foreigners like Michael Smith and the Australians are now going to, I think, compete with one another to get into this.
To pile on the Clintons?
Well, I think they have to, because what we're going to show today is a two-part thing. We're going to do one part today, and this is like in the bullfighting, the matador and the picador and all that kind of stuff. We're going to put a few
pins in the back of
not
the Clintons?
pins,
swords, whatever.
Yeah, like more like meat hooks or whatever, into the narrative. Give people a chance. Today is a link-intensive presentation where there are lots of links for people to read, particularly you prosecutors, you investigators around the world. Many of the foreign ones, and I'm speaking to you now, may not be aware of the strict laws and nuances that do apply in this country. Equally, many of the U.S. and state attorney generals may not be aware of some of the foreign laws. And so what we're going to try to do is get into some of the meat here. But if we go to the first page,
yeah.
The essence of this presentation, it's all about this question that started with somebody alleging, I think it was Doug Band alleging, that resources, not necessarily money, and here's where we have to be very careful with the word splitter, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton said no money was used to pay for the wedding. He didn't say no resources. Clinton Foundation resources were paid.
So what would that indicate?
We're going to go all through that.
Okay.
So
depends on what you definition of wedding is.
But what our overarching argument here, to keep it simple, stupid, this is the way I often think about this myself, is what Bill and Hillary Clinton have been doing here since the inception of the foundation on the 23rd of October 1997 is they've been exploiting the loopholes that while there are rules out there, about what should happen, if you game the people who decide whether to enforce the rules, you could just march along, which is what the Clintons have done, in my view, since the 23rd of October 1997.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but I believe that they've done that since basically the 1980s when Bill Clinton was the state attorney general of Arkansas. They sort of very early on identified who you need to control. They had control over the coroner in Arkansas, and this literally allowed them to get away with murder.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. So, but I was narrowly focused on the charity issue, and so on the charity, what they've been doing is they've been using arguments to bamboozle the public around the world. The public is gullible. We're bitterly divided in this country. We may be 50-50 or whatever, left versus right. And then now within the Democratic Party, thankfully, people are waking up to what a disaster Clintonism has been and what a disaster unregulated globalism has been. But they've been using these false front charities as a way to subsidize Bill and Hillary's lifestyle, the two-mansion couple, as well as Chelsea. And it's time, as we said in the previous broadcast, and we're going to be hammering this point, to Chelsea Victoria Clinton. You are not 21 years old anymore. You are much older. You're the mother of two children. You have responsibilities to those two children. You write all these books, the children's books, the grown-up books, and all this kind of stuff. You're fond of taking on Donald Trump and other people, but you and the principal economic benefits that you have derived have been exploiting the resources created by your parents through the operation of these crooked charities. These are ill-gotten gains that you've been enjoying your entire life. And in my view, that's why you don't feel you need to work. And that's all going to change imminently. It's going to change. It has already changed, and it's going to get worse. And you need to steel yourself because you face a simple choice. If the world watches you get behind your parents and ape whatever they're saying and use their crazy arguments to try to deflect and dissemble, you will go down the tubes. That I promise you.
She's Ivy League educated, of course, right?
Not exactly.
Okay. What do you envision her working, like chain gang, pounding rocks kind of
Well,
job?
I don't want to make light of it, particularly because this is, there comes a time in your life when, you revere your parents, and there are these various books that have been written about how her parents, when she was very, very young, would say to her as a little kid, hey, you're going to hear this negative argument about us, and that, which I think is absolutely disgusting child abuse, but nonetheless, that's what they apparently did to her. Mm-hmm. Now she's been flying around the world in private planes and living in a $10 million, $20 million houses and, hanging around with billionaires and celebrities her entire adult life.
Yeah.
Getting things handed to her, choice gigs at NBC and elsewhere, and, taking, but maybe not fully appreciating just how crooked the Clinton Foundation became. And I'm a little bit optimistic in the sense that when she first started out her career, she didn't want to have anything to do with this Clinton Foundation. And it was only after around, I think, by reading the public available stuff, only around 2010, 2011, that she became more interested in getting stuck into the affairs of the Clinton Foundation. She tried, apparently, to reform it, bringing in Eric Braverman.
Right, that's what I was going to ask you about.
A friend and a mentor, and then he left. So she must know that something is wrong here, and this will be a good test. Is she going to be, just a chip off the old block of her crooked parents, or is she going to stand up and say, you know what, I'm not in with this, I'm not down with this, I'm not going down the river for this. You parents, you did this. This is all about what happened using your initiatives and your lack of morals and your lack of good sense, and I'm not supporting you on this. She does that, I'll stand up for her.
We hear a lot about how Ivanka Trump married a Jewish guy in Jared Kushner, but I've heard very little said about Hillary marrying a Jewish guy. Mark, what's his last name?
I don't think Hillary married a Jewish guy.
Chelsea. Right, sorry.
Mark Mezvinsky, yeah.
And he's wearing a yarmulke and a tallis in their wedding photos. So I wonder, is Chelsea Jewish? Are their children Jewish?
I mean,
or are they worshiping Moloch? I mean, we need to. These are quite. We want to know what happened.
My understanding, and I only have the understanding of being. You remember the vignette that my parents were told in 7th grade, my first parent-teacher conference at Horace Mann, that I was smart enough to be Jewish, but I'm not actually. I'm not actually Jewish, and I believe the test of whether somebody is Jewish is whether. First test is whether your mother.
Yeah, I think that was a Nazi test. I believe modern Judaism, now that they've got DNA testing, if either parent is Jewish.
That it? Really?
I mean, again, if you go to B&H photo style Judaism, unless you're like doing all that stuff, you're not Jewish. They wouldn't even consider me Jewish. So, without getting too much into that, we'll
ponder that one on
another episode, right?
So we can move to the next slide, and this one we'll go through pretty quickly, but we like to go through it in every presentation for several reasons. Those of you new to the approach that we take, please understand we have an absolute First Amendment right to express our views. Our views are not, seat of the pants views. We have done a tremendous amount of work looking only at publicly available sources. We have no private, confidential information. We wouldn't be discussing it if we did. And so this is just based on publicly available information. We provide links through all these presentations. We provide links, and I encourage you to go back and look through the links, print them out yourselves. There's no charge for all these presentations. Probably the only cost would be ink and paper. And if you printed out every single link, you might need a new house because there's a lot of information to go through here.
Yeah.
But one thing, of the many things that Jason has done so well, is there's a playlist link at the bottom. I don't know if it's been updated for last. It has been updated for last week. I do know that. And then maybe if we could hit that one link.
Yep, I've got it coming right here on the other screen.
What that does is that shows you all of the videos that we've done. I don't know in what order it is, whether it's chronological or...
I did try to make it chronological so people can, follow along, or you can go all the way to the bottom of the list and start from the beginning where even before it was called Sunday with Charles, I've got the early interviews, and of course you were the first person to tell us about the strange death of Peter Smith. So there's quite a lot of material on there that people can go back and review.
And what I'm very pleased to see, I've had the great fortune, and I like a shout out to the many people who have been kind enough to take this project up in the alternative and mainstream media. I've had a chance to see how other people's podcasts get picked up, and there's definitely a correlation between the length of a podcast and its viewership. So we're out here in the 2.5, 3 hour territory. That is way off the charts in length, and I would apologize for it, except my goal here is to help the many prosecutors and investigators around the world, and we are saving them, Jason, I think. We may be hurting the casual viewer, but we are saving the investigators and the prosecutors around the world literally thousands and thousands of hours by doing it this way.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the way I look at it, Charles, is that it's almost like a college lecture about the Clinton Foundation, and you're the professor. So it's not necessarily designed to be a YouTube clickbait kind of a 7-minute or whatever the optimum thing, and it's not designed to be an entertainment show, although a lot of people tell me they find commenting on our little witticisms very entertaining. It really is designed to lay out the facts. And I mean, not to overstate this, but what happened last week with Michael Smith filing that complaint with the FBI, and then Zero Hedge picking it up, and Mark Tapscott's new publication picking it up, remind me of the name? LiveSet picking it up. Now we're starting to see the momentum build, and as a citizen of a foreign country filing a formal complaint with the FBI, I mean, these are serious people, Charles. That's not a joke. I mean, I really feel like the match that you've lit has now, like the kindling has taken, there's about to be a bonfire here.
Well, we've lit. And what I would say is, I am aware of multiple foreign individuals who are well along in processes with multiple foreign governments who are all watching this show, and as they see this progress, the tough questions are going to be asked around the world. I think it's also the case that we're seeing a lot more of this in the States. I think we're going to start to see state governments and mainstream journalists, I can say, are also picking up on it.
Yeah.
So let's, you're right to move me to the next page. I like to start each presentation with a brief review of what actually did happen in the preceding week.
Yeah.
And that's actually, the whole idea for me of this show is that on Sundays, typically absent sports, the Sunday shows have become so predictable, the political talk shows, that I can't watch them anymore. And they're just, there's nothing there. Generally speaking. And so what I like to set up is to review the important things that may have happened in the last week, and then pick on a specific topic that will drive the news in the coming week or weeks, and go into that in some depth. So that's the approach we want to take.
Right.
Now we are going to know this, I believe, sooner rather than later. We are going to know exactly what was in the Nunes memo, and maybe more than that.
This is huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah, and this, Thomas Paine has a great, I saw it after I put this together, but he has a great piece in here about what he thinks could be in the Nunes memo and what's really happening here. But what we have is we have a captured mainstream media that was in the tank to sell the narrative that Hillary Clinton was inevitable as the first female president of the United States of America. Get over it, you old white angry men. That's what's going to happen. And so we're now learning, we will now learn the degree to which the whole primary season and the whole general election was a play. Put on by the Clinton Foundation.
Including Bernie.
Put on by the chorus, Greek chorus, as it were, of the mainstream media. And we're finding out a very limited number of people in the FBI and the Department of Justice and the NSA and the CIA and elsewhere had the ability to basically decide who was going to be the next president of the United States, to conduct and also condone gross criminal activity carried out in the name of the U.S. government, financed by the U.S. taxpayer. And this is not a scandal. Everyone likes to say it's worse than Watergate. This isn't worse than Watergate. This is in a different universe of criminality than Watergate. This is more than just Richard Nixon, and a few odd people, the plumbers, screwing around with, elements of an election. This is a corrupt enterprise that was installed beginning, I would argue, as late as January 1993, arguably maybe even earlier than that in the George H.W. Bush administration.
I think November 22nd, 1963.
All right, whatever. But this is a criminal enterprise that has been allowed to flourish. It uses taxpayer dollars. It is ballooned in scope and significance at a time as the national debt went up by $10 trillion. Our children and grandchildren have to pay that debt off eventually, or pay it down. And this is not something that we can let the mainstream media, I don't really listen to the mainstream media at all, but the people who pass themselves off as the pundits, we can't listen to them. If you don't have a stand, if you're not prepared to say that this, what we know now in the Nunes memo, is outrageous and should result not simply in the early retirement of McCabe, but McCabe needs to be sent down. He either cooperates or he goes to Guantanamo, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree with that. I mean, this is a real serious issue. It's funny to me, and this kind of gets to the Bundy trial thing. There are certain people who I speak to now as a result of Crowdsource the Truth who are on both sides of these issues. And there's this phenomenon where if somebody doesn't like the person, like if they don't like Donald Trump or if they think the Bundys are outlaws or whatever, they don't seem to care that the justice system is being misused to get to them. You have to care.
I mean, and that really, I won't go all into it today, but one of the things I did before I even started looking at the Clinton Foundation, I will reveal, this is a newsbreaker, that I got my first C in freshman year colonial history. I couldn't follow it. So that got me off the track of studying history. And then when I retired in 2002, I thought, why don't I study some history? And when you study history, it's not the Declaration of Independence that's all that. I mean, that's interesting. Some argue that was lifted from the Petition of Right in 1628, and you can go back and back and back to the Magna Carta, the Charter of Liberties. There's some edict in Pistres, however you pronounce that in modern France.
Piss dossier.
But there's a long history of tyrants trying to grind the rest of us into the ground, and that history ebbs and flows. We've made enormous progress in 1776, but the true tale from 1989 forward seems to be globalists trying to crush nationalists around the world, and in particular in our country, and a prime instrument of that crushing has been the simultaneous advancements of the internet, advancements of technology, and the willingness of we the people to give ever more power to our FBI, to our security services, to the deep state. And this has to be changed. And this is a wake-up call here. We now really need to get back into this and get into this Nunes memo. And I hope it comes out tonight. I hope they don't wait. They're now saying maybe 18 days or 20 days. It should come out immediately. We paid for it.
Yeah, and Adam Schiff is like, it's nothing.
Adam Schiff.
That guy's terrible.
Shifty Adam Schiff?
I met him on a train as well.
Really?
And I'll tell you what, I started a conversation with him and I asked him, how are you doing this Russia investigation with no evidence? And the look on his face, it was like, I've seen it a few times. I saw it in the coroner in Las Vegas. Their eyes, it looks to me like someone who is really trying to hide their true feelings about what you've just said. And I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah, no interest in Adam Schiff.
No, he's terrible.
So what we know here, Sebastian Gorka, I think, in addition to having a great accent, is a very smart guy. And if we pull up that second link.
This one?
Yeah. I'm afraid, I'm of various minds, and I'm willing to be convinced. I'm trying to be neutral and objective. I think what happened, as is the case with any fraud, I think that the Clintons conned the Obamas. That's what I think. I could be wrong. I mean, perhaps the Obamas were willing to be conned, and Team Obama was willing to be conned, but I think when history is actually written, we will discover that that meeting in Dianne Feinstein's house in June of 2008, when Hillary was not going to be the nominee, when whatever deal was cut, in that meeting, I think the conversation went something like, well, you got me, Barack. You're going to be the nominee. You might even win the general election. But you need what I have over here, and that's a lot of money. Do you want this money over here? You know, that's part of it. And maybe, and the Clintons are king and queen of opposition research, whatever that idiotic firm GPS Fusion was doing. I mean, to hear them huff and puff about their great credentials and what they do for a living, they're a joke. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Glenn Simpson looks like a gym teacher.
If that, or a driving instructor.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was just absurd. I mean, here's a guy, talking about all his great credentials and the approach they take to produce it. They produced the PIS dossier. It makes no sense.
It's ridiculous.
And but anyway, Gorka is on to a point. Dr. Gorka is on to a very important point. I'll give the Obama administration a pass in the June 2008 to January 20th, 2009 timeframe, right? But at some point after January 20th, 2009, if Jason Goodman were elected president of the United States, I don't know what you'd do at 12:01 after you got your speech done, or what, 1 o'clock after you got sworn in. But one of the things I'd want to do is I want to go and have a list of questions that I would, wanting to know about. I now have the highest security clearance in the country. I want to see the alien files. I want to see a whole.
I was going to say I'd arrest George H.W. Bush, but that would be 12:02. I'd get the alien files. Someone, actually, Mr. Hudson, told me that the President of the United States does not have the highest security clearance.
See, I'd change
higher.
that. Well, I would change that if I were the president. That's unacceptable. Because you can't, if the president, the highest elected official, does not have the ability to know, you've been through a vetting process through the primaries and the election. I'm sorry, you've earned the right to know everything. You can't have this twin system of government, extra constitutional government, where there are people over here who have a higher security clearance than the president. I think it's baloney.
It's the very definition of the deep state, that these unelected guys have more decision-making power. I mean, that's what's happening. They're trying to push out Trump, and that's been happening from, before he was elected up until right now. Right.
Well, it's just unacceptable. I'm sorry.
Agreed.
And not only is it unacceptable in future, I think the history, there should be a special commission, an empowered commission with subpoena power, not a bunch of professors, to go back and look at the abuses of the deep state, going all the way back, and hold the people accountable who need to be held accountable. So we don't really know, there's this third link, we don't know how far along the FBI agents and the DOJ, U.S. attorneys actually are. I don't know this Liberty One site, but I thought it was an interesting article. I thought we'd give Adriana, whoever she may be, a little bit of benefit here, putting this link up. But I
can't remember who it was, but Laura Loomer had said to me, no, it was Robin Gritz, and then Laura confirmed it, that this SAC, the special agent in charge at the FBI in Little Rock, has a sordid history that makes them believe that she's there to kind of sack the investigation.
Well, so I think, again, I obviously am not in government, and I certainly am not running the FBI or this investigation, but I believe, based on the evidence I've reviewed and I'm trying to share with people, the history of corruption involving the Little Rock, powers that be and the Clintons is so sordid and has gone on for so long and it has not yet been punished, that I would say, anybody who has had a long history of working in the FBI office has got to prove to me that they're not crooked.
Right.
And, I would not be giving a lot of the people there the benefit of the doubt. I also think in this case that, maybe geographically it's important to have some of the investigation conducted from Little Rock, because after all, that's where one of their offices. But the standard Clinton approach is, of course, to say your office is over here when the real work's being done in the Harlem office or in Chappaqua or in, who knows, in Ira Magaziner's basement in Papa Squatch Road, Bristol, Rhode Island, or somewhere else around the world. We don't know. So I think I hope that that the FBI investigation does indeed involve multiple offices. I hope that the agents involved are the ones who were trying to get a real investigation done when they were refused having subpoena power. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that the FBI agent's very far along. I mean, when you look and see what the FBI does in the FBI vault file reports, I mean, they're pretty thorough people when they want to be thorough. So I hope they tune the meter to not like normal thorough, but super thorough,
I think it's like any other organization, and now that we've had some personal contact with Robin Gritz and some of the other people she's put us in touch with, you really get to see how, like anything, there's people who are very, very strong and people who are like, what the hell is this guy doing here?
Right. But I think when the FBI, the FBI has certain resources, our government has certain resources that I don't have. Like one very important resource is that they have the ability to trace bank wires. They have the ability to get bank accounts. They have the ability to get Treasury Department declarations concerning foreign bank forms.
Right.
That's stuff I can't do. Now with that, and they also have the ability to walk in and get all the records.
Bust in the door at Paul Manafort's house and guns and take whatever they want.
Well, they absolutely have that right, and they have the obligation to do that in this case.
To Manafort's place?
No, they won't find Clinton files there, but they need to bust down the Clinton Foundation doors around the world and get the files, get the records. And then they need to do the same thing with the big donors. Big donor by big donor by big donor. There's a correspondence file here that, on every major grant, there's a correspondence file on the construction project, there's a correspondence file on the bank loans. I mean, they got to get all that stuff, all the board minutes, all the memos, all the external reports done in the Clinton Foundation. They got to get all that and put together a comprehensive timeline.
Not to distract you, Charles, but some of the comments are saying that the government shutdown is a distraction from the FISA memo.
Could partially.
It was driven by Chucky Schumer.
It could partially be that, but I mean, this is why it was so important to get foreign governments on the case.
Yeah.
You may be able to shut down the U.S. government temporarily, but you can't shut down all the governments around the world, and those governments are, getting rather cheesed off at this point.
They want their money.
They want their money back. Now, we're hearing this media smother indictments piece is, you're almost on it there, yeah.
This one?
Above it, yeah. Okay, this is an interesting read, and I didn't have a link for you. It's pretty
That's
funny
just
that the ad.
dopiest photo.
Huh?
Oh, that's an ad? Oh no, okay. Induce vomiting, yes. Well, keep this picture handy in case you need to induce vomiting.
But it is worthwhile, and we will be going over this in future presentations. Former prosecutor, federal prosecutor Joe DeGenova has an excellent interview, I think I sent it to you, involving Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny Thomas, who's a wonderful person. Through Joe, Ginny interviewed me in 2016. And Joe is point and center on this Uranium One matter, the trucking company indictment and all that. But this is an article worth reading. You're going to hear all the people in the mainstream press say, there's no connection between the recent trucking company indictment and Uranium One. To be polite, balderdash. So this is a good read when you have time, and we can go back into the body.
It's so interesting how deep state has become part of the mainstream vernacular. That was,
Yeah. Now, are you a subscriber to the New York Times?
I have become one.
All right, so we can hit that link. I hate to give business to the New York Times.
Well,
but
I subscribe to accommodate our trolling of them.
Thank you. But this is an article from a long time ago, basically glorifying this. I don't know how to pronounce this. Is it samizdat? But it's basically an underground press. And I actually knew about this, and I remember watching it flourish as the Berlin Wall came down. And I think what you're doing here, what we're doing here with Crowdsource the Truth in this show, is in some ways a modern version of this. And I would really encourage our viewership, if you can find it in your hearts, if you like what we're doing, please recommend to one or more friends that they take a look at the various shows, not simply Sunday with Charles, but the other shows as well. And if you get into Sunday with Charles, go back to the first episode, ask your friends what they think about it, ask them if they have time for it. We need to spread the word. And the best way to spread word about a product or service or an idea is word of mouth. And you saw the power of it in, in 1970. If you had told me that the Soviet Union would fall and Eastern Europe would fall, and that I would eventually be, being interviewed by Sputnik News to try to expose a scandal,
you would never believe it,
in the United States, where the internal people of the United States and the FBI and the Department of Justice were, interfering in elections, selling this fake Russia collusion delusion narrative to distract from the reality of a collusion effort between the Hillary Clinton elements and the crooked donors behind them who financed this grifter wedding, trying to basically put her in as president for life.
You'd be more likely to book a surfing vacation in Vietnam.
Exactly. That's right. I wouldn't be on vacation in Vietnam in 1970. I was getting ready to be worried about my draft number.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. So we can go back in. There we go. So you don't need to pull up these last 3 links, but I just would also encourage our viewers, contact your senator. The way Congress works, contact your senator, especially Chuck Grassley, who is just a giant of a human being, to give them encouragement, to tell them, listen, we the people, we need to understand what happened here. Not this sanitized, give a nice, I wonder what the price of this thing is these days, but no longer do we need this kind of, ridiculous fiction passed off as nonfiction.
It's been discounted quite heavily.
I'd probably get one for 99 cents now at Jack's $1 store or something like that, as much as you need. But we need to reach out, particularly you in the Crowdsource, the truth community. We need to reach out to senators, give them encouragement, and then pick on the senators who are, Democrat, but not rising to the occasion here. Because what you really need to understand is you let this precedent stand, you Democrats. There is a possibility, not only that Donald Trump will win in 2020, but that his successor in 2024, God forbid, could be a right-wing version of Hillary Clinton.
What if it's Ivanka?
Or Ivanka, yeah. There are a lot of kids. I mean, by then you could have Trump.
Yeah.
But this lesson here in the subversion of the election system, the perversion of the system of justice, the persecution of individuals using the IRS, this precedent cannot stand unexposed and unpunished. It needs to be fully exposed. People who are pulling the strings on this, even if it reaches, God forbid, all the way up to Barack Obama and Valerie Jarrett and those people.
I believe it does.
Well, even if it does, and especially if it does, it needs to be fully exposed, and people need to pay serious prices.
There was something else that you were saying earlier, about how the Clintons tricked Obama. I don't think it's that. I think all of these things, it's all about influence, about forcing people to do things and giving them no other choice. And we've seen a lot of other elements of evidence that Barack Obama was sort of this deep state manufactured candidate. Dr. Corsi has done a ton of research with Mike Zullo and his cold case posse with Sheriff Arpaio, right, showing that Barack Obama birth certificate that was presented on whitehouse.gov was a digitally forged document. Now, I'm not saying anything about the birthplace of Barack Obama, but obviously it raises the question of why is there so much controversy around that document?
Well, all I can say, I've talked about it before, but when I have been around, the few times I've been around security clearance matters for a friend who was getting a security clearance, I could tell you that the level of inquiry is really, really severe, and you would not be able to get away with, say, not providing your transcripts in high school, college,
but didn't
law
he do
school.
that?
Well, that's what he did, yeah. And you wouldn't be able, after you got out of college, to say, well, for the first 5 years, I don't know what I
right.
did. You just wouldn't be able to do that. And they don't, when they do a serious security level clearance of somebody, they check really hard. I mean, they check, they go, I know, for example, that they go to your, I don't know if you were in a dorm, but I was in my freshman year. They'll go and they'll check, okay, who are your roommates?
Wow.
Who was in your stairwell? Your logical circle of friends. What clubs were you in? What activities did you have? What did you do for summer vacation? All this kind of stuff. They would have an incredible file on you, just to make sure it's precisely in those impressionable years, adolescent, college, etc., that you can meet these people
right.
who you think are just normal friends, but actually they're super sleeper agents, or they're, you know,
The sons of...
whatever. And one of Obama's best friends in college was this Pakistani guy who traveled around the world with him, or traveled to Pakistan with him.
Pakistan.
Yeah, that's the correct country.
I love this notion that you're asking about a security clearance for a friend. We'll go with that.
Not me.
You're right.
So if we go back into the chart there, the other person, you know, who got a lot of guff, frankly, during the 2016 election period. Here you have Jake Tapper, the entire New York Times, Washington Post, everybody at CBS, NBC, ABC's in the tank for Hillary. But Sean Hannity dares to seem like he's in the tank for Donald Trump, and that is a gross abuse of journalistic, in quotes, standards.
Right.
I mean, it's outrageous that he would, you know, some of his hosts at Fox saying, why don't you go take a leave of absence and work for the Trump campaign? I mean, you're doing it anyway, you may as well get paid.
Wow.
You know, but Sean Hannity has done fantastic, relentless work. He, with his core team of Peter Schweitzer and Sarah Carter and now John Solomon, I'm leaving people out, but Greg Jarrett and others, they really have done great work. We need, in the crowdsource community, I really would appreciate it if as many members as possible can follow these two links. One is a 17-part dump, and if there's a new dump, if it goes to part 18, I want to know just as soon as it happens, you know, this new dump. But just if we could pull up one thing of this, which would be part 2.
Part 2.
Yeah. Now, I've heard even the great Judge Knapp say, if we only had a transcript of the interview that Hillary Clinton did, you know, with the FBI. Here it is.
Wow.
Here it is.
Has Judge Knapp been reviewing this?
I don't know that he's gone to this level of detail, but I mean, you know, people, there's a lot of, we did a special presentation on this a number of weeks back, I forget what the title of it was, but where we went through an analysis of how many pages in each dump are there, how many are still deleted. We need to reconstruct a timeline of what really happened here. I wish the FBI had done it that way for us. And we need people to understand what these strikeouts mean, what a form should look like. What you see, you just stop for a second. B1, B3, B1, B3. What does that mean? I think that means the reason behind the redaction.
Oh, I'm sure Robin could tell us.
Right, but we need to go through systematically. Here is a transcript of, you know, what supposedly may have happened.
Yeah.
And here you see, after reviewing an email dated 22 March 2009 with the subject line, Ray follow-up, Clinton stated this email pertained to how her files were going to be treated in state. I think when we marry up what we're learning about the existence of a real investigation beginning the 6th of July 2015 by the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, a referral that triggered a real investigation 10th July 2015 into mishandling by Hillary and Uma. We marry up what we learn in that with this and start cross-checking and start saying, well, how much at variance was this sort of approach for a prime target? I mean, when they were going after Al Capone, did they have an interview at his, you know, at the FBI headquarters where his co-conspirators were there, having signed immunity agreements, you know, and he wasn't interviewed under oath? I mean, is that the way it worked?
Probably no. So when you say the Inspector General of the intelligence community, that is or is not Michael Horowitz?
It's not. Michael Horowitz is the Inspector General.
DOJ.
The what is it, the mafia phrase? The tutti, whatever it is.
The capo di tutti capos?
Right.
The head of all the heads?
He's the big kahuna. There are, I think, 92 separate, I may have that wrong, but I think it's like a number like 92.
IGs?
Separate IGs for Congress and this and that and different departments and everything. This is the IG I'm referring to is the intelligence community IG, which is a very high level appointment because that person has to have the ability to see all classified stuff. And that person made a referral under Section 811C of the, I think, Intelligence Authorization Act of 1995, 811C. We put the link up to whatever that statute is. It's a very serious decision to make such a referral, saying there was mishandling of classified information. That's criminal activity.
Yeah.
Referred it to the FBI, July 10th, 2015. The FBI, in theory, you know, the question is, did they get into, you know, a Lamborghini and a whole bunch of Hummers, or do they get into the
No, you had a
Scooby-Doo?
Porsche 911.
Go the Scooby-Doo.
The Scooby van, right.
You know, and I believe that you may have located a missing Scooby-Doo.
The mystery machine. Yeah.
Something happened to that thing.
Yeah, we're gonna have to find out what happened.
Yeah, you know, the funny thing about this, when I was thinking about the Scooby-Doo van, and it's, you know, not the image that I'd want to, you know, the Scooby-Doo president, but I didn't know the name of it was the Mystery Machine. How apt.
Yeah, exactly. What goes on inside there?
Yeah. You don't have that sound effect, do you?
You know what? I just missed the opportunity to play the sound effect. I apologize.
That's okay. We can bring that in
We'll
another
have that.
moment.
We'll make this a standard recurring theme here on the show, perhaps.
So if we go back, I would really encourage Sean Hannity, if he must have a staff somewhere, whether on his website, in his radio show, TV show, at Fox, they need to print out every page of every one of these documents, reconstruct it in a chronology, right? Both the Hillary R. Clinton 17-page one, 17-part one, and the second dump is the Uma Abedin and Anthony Weiner search warrant application, which has a lot of great information in it as well.
Well,
So, what?
something happened.
Whoa!
It says the page does not
It
exist.
definitely did exist.
Let's see here. Maybe we need to do it like this.
You have to do the whole, the first line, yeah. Yep. That's weird.
No, not there.
Well, it could just be a bad link, in which case the way to get that is just to go into Google.
What if we search right here?
Yeah, you try Abedin, Weiner, affidavit. Abedin is with an I in the second, yeah. No, Abedin. And then Weiner, and then affidavit, AFFID, yeah. Yeah, there you go.
This?
This one here. It must have been, I gave a bad link. There you go. So this is very important. This is a search warrant. We've been through this before, but in the body of this lengthy document, they describe, in the rationale for why they want the search warrant, they describe the ongoing process of reviewing the potentially mishandled classified information, and they give enormous details in here. So the investigation was very far along by this period before the election in 2016, and so what happened?
Yeah, well, we should ask Thomas Paine and
Right.
Robin to review this and give
Right.
us their insights.
So if we jump back into the presentation and go to the next page. All right. So Bill Clinton really, very seldom does he make unforced errors. He's been extremely good, I think, at shifting the narrative when he wants to shift the narrative, at shutting up when he should shut up, unlike certain people, Hillary. But in this
he's a
case,
very smooth operator. There's no doubt about that.
when he's on his game, he was a smooth on. But there's that movie. What is it? 4 Weddings and a Funeral.
Yeah.
This is 1 wedding and too many funerals. We talk about this first link here. This is an excerpt from the Women's Wear Daily, and it
Wow.
a perfect wedding day. It's just it's sickening, frankly.
They had bears, apparently.
Right. So weddings like this do not come cheap,
Oh, no.
and
Several 100,000, if not more.
far more than that.
Yeah.
Far more than that. When you consider, who knows how much was actually used here to, script this whole wedding, to who organized the invitation list, who was the social secretary, who organized the travel, what
The
was really
security
spent.
must have been crazy.
Yeah, put me at Oprah's tail. That's pretty funny. And I don't begrudge anybody a fine wedding, but they need to be paid for.
Ooh, look at the name of this store.
The paper trail. Yeah, and I used to live in Rhinebeck.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a nice town.
Cabin fever, paper trail. Wow, that's really ironic.
Right, but this clearly cost a tremendous amount of money to get all this thing put together. And again, so the question is not framed the way Bill framed it. He said no money, no Clinton Foundation donations, I think he said, were used to pay for the wedding. That's not the issue. The issue is what resources were diverted from the Clinton Foundation since October 23, 1997, to finance the lifestyle that allowed the Clintons to stay out of jail and pay off their debts and have enough money left over to pay for this extremely expensive wedding. Now, while at the same time we have news on this Canadian front,
oh yeah,
that now the Canadian government, a private family investigator has concluded that most likely it was a double murder of this couple here who may have had financial difficulties, but they made the mistake of working on Haiti relief. They had a drug company with the Clinton Foundation in Haiti, I want to say in 2014, at a time where the Clinton Foundation certainly was not authorized to do Haiti relief anywhere.
Yeah, I've heard about this. Holly Seelger was reporting on this, and this just came out Friday, that this new evidence indicates that it was a murder. Not surprising to me.
Right, and so, and this is one where Justin Trudeau, if you're listening, if your people are listening up there, and Chrystia Friedland, who is a Rhodes Scholar and now I think foreign minister or whatever, and you've got your finance minister who's under suspicion of being engaged in dodgy shell game companies. You up in Canada, far be it for me to give you advice, but you got to get on the team here. I mean, you have not only sent tens of millions of Canadian dollars in the past to the Clinton Foundation, you've allowed this Clinton Juicer fraud to continue, and you also just recently, Justin Trudeau and your people, allocated $20 million towards this Clinton Foundation fraud when it's not a public charity, and you know better. You have strict rules in Canada. This does not qualify under American rules. It certainly doesn't qualify under Canadian rules. So why aren't you sicking the Royal Canadian Mounted Police on this Sherman matter and then diving into the real history of what happened with the Clinton Juicer Ventures?
I call him Castro Jr.
That's
I think you could write a book called The Real History of What Happened.
So, I hesitate to put up fake news, but
CNN?
Yeah, but we're going to have the CNN just for fun. They've torn themselves away from trying to find MH370 to write this article, and it's a personal insult. Okay, it's a personal insult. All right. So, Billy, you're a big boy. Get used to being insulted, because that's going to be the least of your problems going forward. And
that's ridiculous that he calls it a personal insult.
Right, and it's a silly approach, because what does it invite? It invites the laser-like response of the great, and I mean truly great, James Woods. If we look back in the thing, in the presentation, this is just brutal.
He's big on Twitter, James Woods.
Yeah.
And a rare conservative in Hollywood.
Right, I love it.
Hammer time.
Mic drop. Look at, if you see what his tweet is, it's pretty good. Here's Bill's.
No Clinton Foundation funds dedicated to Haiti or otherwise were used to pay for Chelsea's wedding. It's not only untrue, it's a personal insult to me, to Hillary, and to Chelsea and Mark.
What a family man.
Right.
What a family man.
And then, okay, so then James Woods says, you were impeached for perjury, zip it. That's quite good.
It gets it to the point. So we can go back into the presentation. Now, this is a site that goes into some of the issues of this link here, evidence at Clinton Foundation. Yeah, no evidence is the key part of that phrase. No evidence because they've made it virtually impossible for you to study the Clinton Foundation, because crucial evidence for the Clinton Foundation has disappeared from the Clinton Foundation site. Now, fortunately, our viewers know that with this one piece of evidence, FBI, November 18th, 2004, read this carefully. You read this document and you know that from November 18th, 2004 forward, at a minimum, the Clinton Foundation is a fraud. Defunct. It has not complied with the rules of this binding agreement through February 29th, 2101, had to be a public charity, had to be a public supported organization, couldn't be controlled by the Clinton family, in gross violation of this, and therefore, no evidence that the Clinton Foundation paid for Chelsea's wedding. The Clinton fraud paid for Chelsea's wedding, or who knows what it actually paid for, but we're going to find out.
Right. You know, it's this phrase, no evidence. There's no evidence to indicate. That is quite clearly, in my view, that's lawyer speak right there. There's no evidence. Well, you destroyed it.
Right.
Now there's no evidence.
Well, but now the problem with that, if we just go down the train for a second,
yeah.
The problem with that for the Clintons, that works in politics. No evidence. That works maybe in corruption. Doesn't work in charity land. Charity, you got to retain. You get a conditional grant from the IRS, a federal tax exemption, and conditional grants from the states and foreign. If you change your purposes without authorization from the IRS in advance, you pass off fake audits as real audits, you break any law around the world, your authority can be retroactively revoked. And it's not the duty of the government to prove that you went off trail. You have to prove to the government when you fall under suspicion that you didn't. So you need the evidence. So you destroy the evidence, you're done.
So it's no longer innocent until proven guilty because it's a different...
In essence, it's, yeah, and it's, you know, it's very, very difficult because this accounting firm, BKD, maybe they're going to have a fire just like up in Chappaqua, but, you know, with their historical records. But this thing has filed all across the United States, in multiple states, in Washington, D.C., around the world. There's a lot of evidence out there. A lot of third parties have been involved. You can't say at this stage you destroy the evidence because then you won't be able to prove you're validly organized. So, you know, they better hope they didn't turn up the bleach bitter, because that's going to be a big problem.
Well, it's known that they did. So basically what you're saying is if someone formed a 501c3 and achieved tax-exempt status on the basis they were going to educate people to open source intelligence methods and then shifted to trying to get, say, I don't know, Cynthia McKinney elected vice president, that might be a violation.
That's also a problem, yeah. But that person, I don't think, declared $2.3 billion. So there's not as much of an opportunity.
25,000
to get a lot of money back. So then we have our dear friend Doug Band and the infamous Doug Band memo.
Yes.
Let's just put that up there on the screen.
Worth looking at again, for sure.
Yeah, it really is. And you know, Tyler Durden out there at Zero Hedge has been very helpful to me personally and to the Crowdsource the Truth effort. Keep up your good work, because this kind of stuff where you do a timely story like this was several days, 12 days before the election. There's a lot of good information in this horrible memo by Doug Band, who should clearly have known better if he's so smart. This is a confession of charity fraud. It's a confession of money laundering. It's a confession of public corruption, influence peddling. It put together with publicly available information that is available on this firm that he's referring to, DK Consulting, being sold to FTI. I mean, this is a massive fraud, and here you are confessing to it. I mean, it's... And you know, what happened here is that Doug Band had been very close to Bill Clinton, been flying around the world with Doug and his brother, who's a traveling international physician for Bill Clinton, supposedly. Been doing this for a long time. Chelsea didn't like it. Chelsea was getting information back from her friends that Doug was, you know, overplaying his hand. Here you see Terry McAuliffe, who I think he can forget about being president of the United States in this universe. Now, maybe in Hillary's alternative universe, not this one.
Wasn't Chelsea being like... Candace from Phineas and Ferb? She was like, Dad, Doug Band is hacking everybody's Blackberries.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, this needs to be read in some depth, but this is the source of the allegation that maybe some of the lifestyle expenses of Chelsea Clinton were effectively being fronted by the foundation. Now, here what people need to understand is when you have a tightly run foundation, I'm aware of many of them, when you have a tightly run foundation, you don't have the luxury of saying, you know what, I got this tax bill over here, $150,000 bucks, but I don't happen to have it for my condo. Any chance you could just give me the $150 and then I'll put it back to you, you know, out of a future grant? So, you know, you can't, if you don't have really tight controls on a foundation, you don't have to put books together for a given year until November 15th of the following year. You don't have to file quarterly reports. A lot can happen in that long period of time where you could basically use it as a cookie jar. You take, you decide that some money that went towards the foundation should have a finder's fee associated with it that goes to, I mean, you can't legally do this, but you could see how somebody like a Doug Band who mixed his, he was basically arguing, look, we're doing everything. It's Clinton Inc. We got the foundation, we got the
doing
business.
Everything is exactly
I
right.
do everything. I'm a one-man jack of all trades.
It's amazing.
And so the Band memo is yet another example of something that prosecutors need to take every single allegation in that memo apart.
That's one to beat the band.
Then when we look, we don't have to put this link up now, but if you hit later on, those who want to look at it, you can look in some depth at Bill Clinton. You have all the presidential candidates' personal income tax returns, but the Clintons are there for 2000 through 2015. And if you pick on 2010, which is I think the link there, you could see just exactly how much money they declared. This is the year I think in which the wedding occurred. And you could start to think about things that are missing in the foundation tax return. Like, how come the income that Bill and Hillary derived from Laureate for his being, or from the Clinton Global Initiative University, the gigantic amount of money that Bill got over a 5-year, I think, contract, how come that contract isn't in the foundation books? And how come, the full impact of that isn't explained in the foundation books and in the Clinton Global Initiative books? But you can get a sense of, how squishy all these different related entities are. And the big thing that when we talk about resources, Mark Mezvinsky was he worked at Goldman Sachs, a fine firm. My brother worked at Goldman Sachs and many friends at Goldman Sachs. And he decided to set up a hedge fund. It is very difficult to set up a hedge fund, particularly in 2010. You remember we had the turmoil in 7 and 8, and the financial crisis. So when we say resources, how many investors in Mark Mezvinsky's fund, had an arm put on them by Bill Clinton or people close to Bill Clinton saying, listen, I got a son-in-law here, I got a marriage, I like the guy to have an income, and, you got money and nothing to do with it, and there's a guy, like a fund, put the money in the fund and you'll be on our good side. How many conversations went on like that? And when it's important to trace all this because in 2010, this is the key year in which Bill gets the 5-year contract from Laureate for $17.6 million, ultimately. Mark's, got a family to take care of, or at least a new wife to take care of. He's got to raise the money to buy the condo. Those aren't cheap.
It was like $30 million, that apartment, wasn't it?
I don't think it was 10 or 20. But so, so real questions need to be asked by the FBI with subpoena power. And we know that this was a matter of concern because we can hit this link here, the WikiLeaks thing, and presto changeo, we will see if you hit the attachment and then go to November 15th. This is a draft bill, December 12th, 2011, so after the 2010 financials were put together for the Clinton Foundation, to Bruce Lindsay, the CEO, with a detailed request from a lawyer who understands not-for-profit land extremely well, Victoria Bjorklund, wrote the book on New York nonprofit corporation law.
What an amazing signature.
That's very, very nice flourish. So here you have the total bill, but then if you go to the next page,
Good work if you can get it, Charles.
That's light, actually. They probably cut him a break. So you see, day by day, they talk about the different things they were doing. If we go to November 15th, I think it was, 14th rather. On the 14th of November, 10.25 hours, that's a lot of time, interview with Mark Mezvinsky. Why were you interviewing Mark Mezvinsky on November 14th?
Full day.
Maybe the other stuff was a lot, revised interview notes took a lot of time. And I suspect they were doing a deep dive into Mark Mezvinsky, who was not a foundation member, not a trustee, not raising money for the foundation. Why were foundation resources used to pay this legal expense? What were they investigating about Mark Mezvinsky? And I have a suspicion it is, when you look at published reports, this is when the Eagle Vale Fund was coming together. And I have a suspicion Simpson Thacher, one important client of theirs is George Soros. They have many big clients. They really understand this whole area of fundraising and hedge funds and the laws that apply to same and charity solicitation. I have a suspicion that some of what Doug Band was saying, got the attention of the Simpson Thacher people, and they said, we really need to understand exactly what was going on with Mark Mezvinsky and his hedge fund and the degree to which the Clinton family office, whether the one up in Harlem or the one that had migrated down to 77 Water that we visited in the summer, that resources of the Clinton Foundation likely were used to get this hedge fund off the ground. And when you start, history played out unfortunately for the Eagle Vale complex. It didn't happen well, but had that hedge fund complex worked, had they started with several hundred million, 300-400 million, whatever it was, and people were looking forward to 2012 maybe, and 2016, and maybe there's a good reason to put some money here with these guys. Maybe there's a way for the Clinton Mafia to concoct deals that others won't see. And had that worked, the management company, the hedge fund complex, would be worth a lot of money. So people who understand issues like that need to dive into these facts. This is just exactly when the Simpson-Thacher review was coming together. There must have been issues of concern. Statements were made to the press about this. What was really happening here? How deep were these conflicts? How much was Mark Mezvinsky standing to make financially out of this? What would Chelsea Clinton's share have been? Were there any explicit arrangements between Eagle Vale Fund and Clinton allies that they would get a cut of management fees by this new fund? These are what solicitations were made to raise the fund, to which parties, what filings were made in states where you need to obtain filings before you solicit, and how does all this relate to the filings of the various foundations? A lot of tough questions.
Well, there's something that jumps right out at me here. The first thing it says that they were doing there is revise interview notes.
Right.
Why would you do that? The interview guy says what he says. You're like, I wouldn't like that. Let's revise what we recall about the meeting. That seems weird.
I'd take all of those criminal
admissions.
Admissions. Yeah. I'd take those out of the.
Right. Crazy.
All right. So then we get into this issue of Summit Rock, and here we're going to break a little bit of news. There's a lot to think about here. Summit Rock is a complex. If we hit the philanthropy button, that it's a money manager. And so what happened is that the Clinton Foundation went down a process, I would argue, illegally of soliciting funds for an endowment. And just to go over some ground quickly, if you create a foundation that's supposed to be, it's supposed to basically operate a presidential archive and a research center in Little Rock, and it has gone through a process where it raised an endowment, in theory, enough to give it the required $7.2 million to the National Archives, and there is evidence that donors thought they were given, certain donors thought they were given money to an endowment, but you fail to account for your holdings of the endowment properly. And in 2008, you find yourself in a position where one of your people, probably, it seems, it's Ira Magaziner and his team in Boston, may have absconded with $23 million from an endowment that you then replace from something you call a quasi-endowment, which must be a portion of your undisclosed slush fund. You cover it over in 2008. These are the kind of things that are very material when you seek to have a new endowment. And you can't, if you have a foundation that's going to be just doing archive and library in Little Rock, you can't then raise a capital endowment and decide with that you're going to fight climate change. You can't do that. Endowment has to be raised, has to be prudently managed. You certainly can't put the endowment in a hedge fund that you just started up that happens to be run by
your son-in-law.
Seems
risky.
And I'm not saying that happened, but what did happen is that the firm Summit Rock that was charged with allocating this endowment, one of the key people there, it has a tie to Eagle Vale a different way, has a tie to Mark Mezvinsky a different way. And that is Michael Fox, who is the husband of Nicole Fox, right, was deputy operating manager of Eagle Vale.
And of course, Nicole Fox was the matron of honor at
Right.
the big fat Grifter wedding.
Right. And so we have, we have some tough questions here because all of these types of disclosures, would need to be made, and they're not currently made in the Clinton Foundation filings for 2000, whenever the endowment came together, 10, 11, 12, whenever those years were. We don't have the kind of granularity that is required in the Clinton Foundation filings and in the related entity filings. And there is no discussion. Remember I said, this is 2010 we're talking about here principally, but in 2015, they refiled the tax returns for 2010. So you have the ability here, if you're a lot of breathing room on the statute of limitations for tax fraud here, to go into this 2010, they certainly have not made the kind of disclosures that you need to disclose about all these related party tensions and transactions.
What do you mean about breathing room on the statute of limitations?
Typically a 5-year statute of limitations. So, if you put the thing in 2000...
For tax fraud?
Typically. In 2011, and I'm not practicing law, but my understanding is it's generally around 5 years. In this case, the 2010 tax return was originally submitted for the parent foundation in 2011, but they revised it in 2015.
But no statute of limitations if it's racketeering.
And no statute of limitations if you fail to file a return, as happened in 1997. And no statute of limitations on murder.
Right.
But if we keep going, all right, we don't need to pull up many of these links, but I just want to make sure that those who are new to this understand that setting up a foundation is not like elementary school and you're putting on a play. You can decide, without regard to talent, there are no rules. You're just going to do something and it'll be fun and your parents will give you candy at the end of it. That's not the way it works. You've got to be lawfully organized and operated, and that's something that I explained in that. We don't need to put the link up, but there's a very lengthy memo up there that explains what I mean by lawfully organized and operated. It is a tough set of standards. You need to start in one state or locality. You need to then make sure inside the United States that you're lawfully configured wherever you choose to solicit and operate. Same internationally. You want to make sure your IRS forms are all right. It's all explained in that memo.
Did you write this, Zero Hedge?
I didn't write the Zero Hedge article, but they wrote it about me.
Yeah, there you go.
And so it also needs to be independent and publicly supported. Okay, and that's this here. You wouldn't know that. This is a material omission on the Clinton Foundation website. You wouldn't know that pursuant to the agreement that was entered into with our National Archives.
The joint use.
And that's not this kind of joint.
Yeah.
The joint use operating and transfer agreement between the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation and the National Archives.
Now, where did you get that if it wasn't included in the disclosure?
A friend made a FOIA request and received it. Now, we haven't been able yet, and this is an area where the crowdsourcers could help us. There should be such an agreement filed in Pulaski County in Arkansas, which is Indian country, but there could be Clinton people stuck into the record bureau there. There should be such an agreement relating to the joint use and transfer agreement of the Clinton School of Public Service operated jointly with the University of Arkansas. There should be a similar agreement. We haven't seen that agreement yet. We need to see that agreement, and you and the FBI and you in Arkansas and the federal investigators, you need to get that agreement. Because there are serious problems, I can tell you, that I've seen without seeing the agreement in the way in which that Clinton School of Public Service was set up. There's evidence in the Roy and Christine Sturgis Foundation that they gave a lot more money out of that foundation based in Texas than was actually used to put up the building. So there's some serious...
What happened to the rest of the money?
Exactly. And why that's a sad case, because that's a foundation that's administered, I want to say, by Bank of America in Texas.
I don't trust them.
I don't trust them either. And they seem, by looking at their churning, they do lots of transactions, and the original grantors of that trust have long since died. So it's it's captive money. Yeah, well, that really needs to be looked into. So then what you need to do is you need to be registered in all states. Now, I put up here certain excerpts from New York Executive Law Section 172.
Oop, sorry.
It's okay. Notice it says the most recent, in red there, the most recent communication from the IRS regarding any audit thereby. So we know in 2016 July, unless the IRS was lying to the public, John Koskinen, I mean, he wouldn't lie, would he? He's the head of the IRS. Oh, maybe he would. He was the one who Congress nearly held him in contempt and wanted to impeach him. But you have to publicly, you have to provide in New York State the most recent communication from the IRS regarding any audit thereby. So if they're being audited, that needs to be on New York State. And as of several weeks ago, I haven't checked today, but as of several weeks ago, not even the 2016 annual filing is on New York State, and it needed to be on there November 15th, 2017. So there's some problems in New York State. And then, if we make it a little smaller, you got to have your audit done by actual accountants. You can't have chipmunks do it.
Not fairy accountants.
You can't do it that way, and it has to be for those of us involved in finance. The financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects and in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. What do we know about the period 2001 to 2004? We know that every single one of those, in quote, audits has the statement in it, these statements are prepared not in conformity with the United States generally accepted accounting principles.
It's like so ridiculous.
Well, that's why you wouldn't put them on the website. But they do exist, and we found them in Massachusetts and California and elsewhere. We don't need to pull up these links, but you have excellent memos here. In each case, they're dated. You see the years 83, 92, 85, 94. It's bedrock principle for U.S. Charity that you have to have tight control of their foreign activities, and they did not. You cannot, as a charity, engage in illegal activity. Yeah. I mean, these memos here are hysterical. There's one, I think they cite a branch of the mafia wanted to set up a charity, and it actually went to a court decision that, actually, you're the mafia. You can't be a charity.
Well, I mean, you can't commit murder as the governor either, but apparently,
right, yeah.
That's,
whatever.
It's just a technicality.
And then this question of material changes. Now, I would argue, again, I'm not a lawyer, but we haven't heard the Clinton Foundation say it's fake news. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney in Little Rock are absolutely not investigating us. You haven't heard that yet out of them. Silence. This was January 4th when this came out. So now here we are. That's a material change. You have 30 days to explain the material change to the public. And that's a material. What's
the material change?
That you're under audit.
Ah.
And you're under investigation, rather, by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney in Little Rock, and who knows what other U.S. attorneys.
So you're saying because they continue to raise money
right.
without telling people, hey, by the way, the board of directors is under indictment or whatever, right. You're not allowed to do that.
That's kind of not smart. I mean, it's not the best move.
Right.
And so we wait with keen interest to see what will be disclosed in New York. But again, we're talking New York State. Attorney General Schneiderman has decided he too is above the law. And he'll investigate Trump immediately, but won't even take a look at the Clinton Foundation. So I would guess that there's a whole bunch of things that we should be keeping our eyes on, just by understanding the variance between what it's supposed to be and what they actually seem to be doing. Now, if you look at just to beat this with a dead horse a little bit, anytime you make an application for a charity, it has to be truthful. You don't tell them like 1% of the truth.
It's so funny that has got to be like written. Like, how is that not obvious?
It is obvious, but there are so many. We don't have enough time to go through all the false federal applications and the missing state applications. And then once you get approval from the feds, you better make sure you register in Arkansas. There's no evidence that I've seen so far that they registered in their home state. And you can't solicit outside your home state, or even in your home state, in certain states, without filing a state solicitation form where you explain all the defects in your record, and you answer questions truthfully under penalties of perjury. You've got to have valid charitable purposes. You can't, set up a charity that's designed to fund my interest in, going to the 4 major tennis tournaments around the world in private planes. I mean, you can't. That's not something you could do.
That sounds like a reasonable cause.
Right? That's a rich second wife. But that's not a charity.
The Charles Ortel Tennis Foundation.
Exactly. Follow the bouncing ball. But the purposes, and we've been through this before, and we'll talk about it a little bit today. But the purposes that are asserted for some of these, in quote, foundations are vague. And in the case of, for example, the Clinton-Justra charity, I actually went onto the Canadian website. It reads like it's a division of Bain Capital. I mean, they talk about it.
Venture philanthropy?
Yeah, it's worse. They talk about how their specialty is supply chain management and creating enterprises. I mean, you can't do that.
As a charity?
That's not a charity.
No.
Right? And if you're going to do foreign work, unfortunately for the Clinton Foundation, Marsha Blackburn's people noticed it. The IRS should have noticed it. The original form, there's a box, a specific box. Are you going to engage in international activity? They did not tick that box.
Wow.
So they've never had the authority to do international work.
Wow. Well, of course. I mean, it was, as you've said many times, it was designed just to create the library and strip club. And then they went on to do all this great stuff. And they basically rely on hoping that people will say, oh, they're helping people. Don't investigate them.
And then you get the question of, the directors. I mean, they're supposed to be truly independent. The directors have to look, the entity, the charity has an independent status, right? It exists separate and apart from the trustees. You've got to make sure that you protect the interests of that charity over your own. And the people they put in as directors, I'm sorry, are nothing more than hacks for the Clinton family. And the hack in chief is Terry McAuliffe. Who through this entire period, did not disclose that he had a financial arrangement with the Clinton family to get them their first mansion.
And McCabe.
And later McCabe. He didn't disclose the fact that he was chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Raising money in 2004 when all this stuff went awry. We're going to explain exactly what happened.
But isn't that public knowledge?
You have to nonetheless disclose, when you're in these different states. In New York State, you've got to disclose the affiliations of your key directors so that people can say, wait, there's a conflict here, The audits we've talked about are a joke. They don't disclose material changes within 30 days. They make sure that you don't know about them by maybe destroying the evidence or hiding it. This is a nuance, we will not cover it today, but when you borrow, and I don't think they legally borrowed in 2004, when you borrow, the income created by the asset that is purchased with the debt is taxable, okay? And they certainly didn't do that right. They didn't go through the related party transactions correctly. And as we've said, they haven't gone through and made timely disclosures. There are multiple cases where they've been investigated in Mississippi, in Pennsylvania, their fundraiser. Other states, had they known about these defects, probably would have investigated them. And this is what we see. Some of this is what I've learned since I wrote the article that was picked up by Fox here. We've talked about it before, and got, 80,000 shares on Facebook at the Breitbart level of the article. This was obvious just before Hillary announced. This was obvious that this was going to bring her down. So, you got to ask people, Democrats, why didn't you notice this?
Well, it's that elephant in the room. They just didn't want, they wanted her to win. So bringing all this up would have been inconvenient.
Right.
That's the real inconvenient truth.
Exactly. So if we jump back into it, actually the previous page. We have this Corinne Brown reporting for jail.
Right.
The 29th of December. That's January. It's a week from Monday. This is her second to last free weekend.
What a dreadful week that'll be for her.
For 5 and then 5 years in prison. 71-year-old person. And here's Hillary Clinton.
That could be a life sentence for her.
Well, here's Hillary Clinton, pandering, joking about pandering to African American people and saying she's got a bottle of hot sauce and her husband's the first African American president. And
did she say that her husband was?
No, others have said it.
Yeah.
But the point here is, Corinne Brown, I'm told that like any longtime politician, there are people who hate her in Jacksonville area where she represented, people who love her. But, I have a certain amount of sympathy for somebody like her who's going to be going away for 5 years in a federal prison, having been, and she's from apparently a rich African-American family, or a well-to-do African-American family. So she didn't grow up economically disadvantaged. Nonetheless, she's led this life of privilege, and now she's going to go to prison for 5 years over her part, not controlling. It's not, the foundation isn't named after her. She's going to go to federal prison for 5 years over an $800,000 charitable fraud, and this thing, spends $800,000 or declared $800,000 of income per day in certain years.
She got great skin for a woman of 71.
So, I think, when exactly are we going to see clear signs that we're moving back towards a system of equal justice under the law? By rights, either you pardon Corinne Brown and say around the country and around the world, charity fraud, come here, bring us your fraudsters, or you send Corinne Brown to jail and you say, what she did is bad, but what the Clintons appear to have done is far worse, and we need to make an example of this.
I presume she is actually guilty of charity.
It certainly seems that way, yeah.
Not really familiar with the case.
So if we go into the next page, all right, now I am not going to try to take everybody through all of this stuff right now, because there's a lot of stuff here.
Oh, but you've got all the...
But people can see for themselves. These are a whole bunch of entities that by the time the Clinton Foundation books were put together for 2010, which remember is, Chelsea's wedding is 2010, and the question is how much money leaked out of these crooked foundations to support the Clinton family lifestyle, and how much of that leakage then financed Chelsea Clinton's fancy apartment, Chelsea Clinton's lifestyle. It's a big question, and I think we deserve answers. But just going through it, the American India Foundation, as I think we've talked a little bit, is a notorious fraud. It has never had its books and records put together properly from inception. That started 6 days after Bill left the White House in 2001, and he was the immediate honorary co-chairman of it. It's a sordid record. We're going to be going through it in some depth in writing. And there's a lot of evidence on this, and it centrally involved a string of fraudsters, some of whom went to prison, Rajat Gupta being key. International AIDS Trust, he waited 9 days to get involved with that one.
After he left office.
After he left office. That's another fraud that I don't see any signs was ever validly approved. The Gates Foundation made a contribution to that fraud in 2001. It was indeed the largest single donor to the International AIDS Trust. We've talked about Old Chai, another fraud. By the 18th of November 2004, because the Clinton Foundation, got involved with this HIV/AIDS initiative and didn't properly explain it, I believe that they gutted their tax authority at the latest on that date when they signed this agreement we've talked about before.
Gutted their tax authority, you mean eliminated the tax-exempt status?
Right, so you have...
Invalidated it?
Well, created the conditions which will allow the IRS and the Department of Justice to go back to that time frame and say, actually, you didn't tell us what was going on, what happened. Now we know, and now we have the right to go back and revoke your tax authority. See, and directors and trustees of a foundation need to be really careful they don't do what these idiots actually did. Because, now when you go in and look at it, and you either say, well, I have no evidence, I have no board minutes, that doesn't help you, right? Because you're supposed to have board minutes. Well, what about these foreign donations that you got? How come you didn't keep track of them? Well, natural
evidence.
Yeah, no evidence.
They have an allergy to evidence.
Yeah.
Now, Charles, you remember that pretty well-known speech or it was like an interview that Hillary Clinton did where she nervously says, well, as you know, there's no way that you would know, but we were broke when we left the White House. It's just, I like listening to and looking at the way people speak because she's so awkward in that moment. How, even if you had $0 going in as president, which, how could that be? Aren't you paid $400,000 a year for 4 years plus have zero expenses, like all your food and your home and your health insurance? How do you not have $1.5 million when you leave the...
It was only when he was there 250, something like that. But
Oh.
your point is well taken. Your point is well taken. And not to mention, I mean, you have, the outside income that could have been earned, trading cattle futures. And all these
Yes,
other things.
exactly.
There should have been something there.
5,000 turned into 100,000.
Right. And so, if you got all these problems through 2004, November 18, then no
Cocaine
subsequent thing is going to be right. So the Bush-Clinton-Katrina Fund, major problems there. The same problems are disclosed in red for all of them. The Juster Enterprise Partnership is a joke. None of the defects, these historical defects, have been noticed to the Canadian government. And the accounts of the Clinton-Juster Enterprise Partnership and its related initiative that supposedly were managed by the Clinton Foundation, not dealt with properly. The shell game in the UK, created on the 10th of July 2007, we'll be going through that in some depth in coming weeks. That, I think, was a ruse designed to reassure the people at Unitaid that the Clinton Foundation controlled an entity somewhere that was authorized to fight HIV/AIDS. And this one, in theory, was authorized in the UK to do that, except this application and corporation were created on the basis of materially false declarations about the state of the Clinton Foundation at that time by Bruce Lindsay and Andrew Kessel in writing, and the records are there.
Have any of these guys emailed you, Charles?
No,
like
no.
Doug Band or Bruce Lindsay?
No, not expecting that. And we've talked in some depth about how the Clinton Global Initiative, Clinton Health Access Initiative were, they were created on a completely false basis, arguing in 2009 that they were a fresh start organization, when in fact CGI began in 2005, CHI began in 2002 illegally, Clinton Bush Haiti Fund was arranged illegally,
Amazing.
Alliance illegally, C40s illegally, and then to top it off, because you can't just do a few of them, you got to do as many as possible, they decided to create a new illegal subsidiary in the UK for CHI and a new one in Sweden. It's not clear exactly when. That may have happened after the 2010 filings were in. But as I note at the bottom here, the original filing on the 14th of November 2011. Now, what happened on the 14th of November 2011?
I don't know.
Mark Mesvinsky was at Simpson Thatcher for 10.25 hours that day when they filed this.
Oh, when they revised his interview?
Right. And so, I mean, this is pretty important because I have the deepest of affection for Simpson Thatcher. When I graduated from high school, I spent 3 months as a proofreader there, an 18-year-old kid. It was a lot of fun. It was a really interesting time frame. It was just when Watergate was blowing up. And
At the law firm.
Simpson Thatcher had nothing to do with
No,
Watergate.
but I'm saying you were there.
I was there, yeah, in the summer of 1974, and it was really, great people were there, and I was paid actually decent money back then, and I think I made in the summer I made almost as much as more than a half of my college tuition.
Wow.
In 3 months, but this. There are cases where law firms are accused of being part of a criminal conspiracy. And, if I were a prosecutor here or an investigator, I would want to get deeply involved in just how extensive was Simpson Thatcher's knowledge of criminal defects in the Clinton Foundation's history.
Huh.
And did they look the other way? Did they have a duty to notify the authorities when they found some of this stuff? Because I'm aware of other cases where law firms are drawn in and deemed to be part of a criminal conspiracy.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you as far as their duty. Like, if you're a law firm and breaking the law, that seems extra bad because you're supposed to know the law and,
Or alternatively, you're a prime candidate to represent the Clinton Foundation.
Exactly.
You guys know how to roll.
It's our kind of law firm.
Yeah. So if we go to the next page, just to really grind this into the dirt, and I love dealing, there was this idiot guy, won a Pulitzer Prize, David K. Johnson or whatever. He's the one who, was all over Donald Trump. I talked to him in 2000, I want to say 16, it might have been earlier, saying, this Clinton Foundation is really, really serious. And he just he didn't want to hear anything. In fact, he just wouldn't even talk to me after a while. Do you know this? I don't know anything about charities, but what you're saying is outrageous. You obviously deserve that Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah, I think the Pulitzer Prize is a fake thing.
Kind of like the Nobel Peace Prize.
I mean, I think they just give it out to people, to try to like lend some credibility to them. Like that moron Kurt Eichenwald was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, and you can just listen to him talk for 5 minutes, and there's evidence in what he says that he's lying.
Right.
Ridiculous.
Or you take what was it, Krugman?
Don't know that person.
Paul Krugman?
Oh, Paul Krugman.
Yeah. Anyway, so we won't go through all of these because this would take too much time. But I've said in the past the audits are all wrong. The specific details in the application for new chai, all wrong. In the case of old chai, when they wound up old chai in 2006, they were required to create a Schedule N form which would show all payments to third parties, and they didn't do that, and that's a gross omission. A lot of money went missing in 2005 and 6. Now, what was going on in 2005 and 6? Hillary Clinton had an expensive re-election campaign in 2006. So, you don't want to see money go missing when one member of the family needs money for an expensive political campaign. That's generally not a good thing. All right, and in the fourth step, there was a gigantic change in the way in which the sizable grants from Unite were accounted for starting in 2010. That is, they made the big change at the new chai level, but they didn't make a corresponding change as they should have at the parent company level. It's a massive mistake. The application for federal tax exemption for the Clinton Global Initiative, riddled with fraud. There's no Schedule N when they wound up old CGI. I may have that wrong, but I don't think there's a valid Schedule N for that. There's certainly are no organization documents for the supposed CGI university, which when you use the word university, as Donald Trump found out, in New York State, you better register with the Department of Education, which they did not do. They didn't provide this employment agreement for Bill Clinton. The Clinton-Bush application, this is the Haiti one, is absolutely doesn't disclose all these defects of past problems with disaster relief charity frauds in India, in tsunami,
it's ironic
in Katrina.
that they're disaster relief. It's like a self-contained disaster.
Right. This issue for Rod Rosenstein, who doesn't seem to be the brightest bulb on the planet, or else he's just, I got to look the other way, Rosenstein. How come 37.1 million was sent by the parent Clinton Foundation to the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund at a post office box in Baltimore, Maryland, where they just got rid of the police chief because there's no law and order in that place? I mean, what the hell was going on? You don't take 37.1 million, which I don't think was a true number of what they actually raised. Nonetheless, you don't declare that you sent that money to a post office box and an address to the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund that doesn't exist. You don't do that. And same problem with Alliance for Healthier Generation. No truly independent and non-conflicted directors. So, you look at this and you ask yourself, why have so many governments given the Clintons a pass, given them money for this fraud, and then failed to investigate it? So many foreign donors. I don't get it. You go to the next page. All right. And here, we're going to go through this very quickly. The earthquake happened on the 12th of January, 2010. And you can see by the 15th, Barack Obama says governments alone are not enough in terms of money for this thing. Already, by the 15th of January 2010, a record number of donations have come in through text messaging. Money has poured into the Red Cross and other relief organizations. So the real question is, how much money in the period January 12th, 2010 through January 28th, 2010, when the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund was lawfully was organized as a Delaware corporation, how much money went towards this but didn't end up in the books of the Clinton Foundation? Because on the one hand, we know that $13 billion, in theory, was raised for Haitian relief. On the other hand, we know the sum total of all the money declared as going into the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund was $50 million.
So where
it's-
did all that other
exactly.
billions come
Well,
from?
it's possible. You know, when you create one of these situations where there's no controls and multiple addresses and, you know, multiple things, people running around and volunteers and nobody checking anything, that's when, you know, money gets diverted maybe to pay for that, you know, caviar and the shrimp. Right? Now, many people have been focused on the Secretary of the Podesta WikiLeaks, which are fantastic. There's a great one here, and you don't need to hit it or anything. This is the Secretary of State emails of WikiLeaks. She's asked for different ideas, her reaction to ideas by this guy, David Domenici, and we're going to get to him, who David Domenici is, because maybe not everybody remembers who he is.
Yeah, who is he?
I'll get to that. But Hillary Clinton's reaction is, great ideas, in parens, no surprise. Let's work towards solid proposal, maybe to Red Cross and Clinton Foundation, since they have unencumbered dollars. This is a bright line, ridiculous comment. Okay, no charity has unencumbered dollars. Okay, families have unencumbered dollars.
What does that mean, unencumbered
That
dollars?
you could do. They do with you know, they get the money and they do with it what they wish. Okay, the Clinton Foundation doesn't have unencumbered dollars. It has money that was raised
For a specific purpose.
the presidential library and the related research facility. That's what all the money raised was supposed to go for that purpose. So to the extent you took money raised for that purpose and you spend it even on curing cancer and you succeed,
Right.
that's charity fraud. You can't do that, right? And the notion that our Secretary of State would say something this stupid in writing, you know, may help explain, you know, why
What happened?
why they needed secret servers and secret electronic devices and aliases, because they were afraid if you saw what she really said,
You'd realize
you
how
quickly
stupid she
realize
is.
just how stupid she is.
I thought she's the smartest person ever to run for president.
That's what I hear. Now, what isn't disclosed here is that Cheryl Mills and Domenici, David Domenici, who is, I think, the son of Pete Domenici, a very famous representative, I think, from New Mexico, were on the board of this See Forever Foundation together without disclosing that relationship in any of the filings. Cheryl is on the board of the Clinton Foundation. And I believe they're also domestic partners.
Huh.
And, you know, to the extent that people derive a personal benefit, a private benefit, from money going to projects in which Cheryl and or Domenici have an interest, you're supposed to disclose that. And if, God forbid, you use the Haiti experiment, and Cheryl Mills supposedly went down to Haiti, you know, 35 times, 40 times, supposedly spearheading relief, you know, and she's the chief of staff of the State Department while she's doing this, and her domestic partner is doing projects, and other people are doing projects down there, and then they, after the fact, or maybe during this, we don't yet know really, a firm called Black Ivy, which we've heard about Teneo, but Black Ivy is sort of a clone of Teneo, the same idea of Cheryl Mills, and this fellow who's mentioned in here, and this is just too funny, Jean-Louis, I think, Warnholtz, writes an op-ed on the 29th of January 2010, building Haiti's economy one mango at a time. And
Wow.
that makes it through the editor. I mean,
Now, the mango thing brings me again back to George Webb. He's done a lot of reporting about mango diplomacy and how drugs were hidden in mangoes and,
Sure.
and imported into the United States.
So, right, and so some very, just as I said before, serious questions need to be asked exactly what Teneo is. Serious questions need to be asked exactly what Black Ivy is. How did each of their projects and business arrangements come into fruition? You know, were resources of the United States government used to put these people, these politically connected hacks, frankly, into a champagne and caviar lifestyle in supposed consulting and investment firms where crooked deals are hatched, you know, on the basis of political experience. I mean, and not investment acumen.
Black Ivy sounds like a Batman villain to me, Charles.
All right, so if we look at the next page, and this we can go pretty quickly through. You know, Chelsea Clinton, this is again from the Secretary of State's emails. That specific email there, don't pull it up, is very long. And it basically, you know, Chelsea goes down early on and I don't know exactly when in Haiti, if she was there, whether it was in January of 2010 or February. She's there early on, and what she sees, she certainly does not like. Okay, so she's smart enough to see this is not happening right. And as a guest, this experience may have been the genesis of her decision to say, listen, my parents are not doing this correctly, and the people around us are letting the family down. I've got to insert myself. And so she gets involved at first with CHAI, which is the new CHAI, which is the Health Access Initiative, and then I think she goes on the board of the Clinton Foundation, and then she gets deeply stuck in as vice chairman, et cetera.
It seems like she's kind of kept in the dark about some of this stuff, doesn't it? Based on her, saying Doug is hacking people's phones and things, and like bringing in Eric Braver. It seems like she was a little bit kind of a wrench in the works.
I think. I mean, it's just, there's certain things. I mean, I don't know if your parents sit you down and tell you everything, in your case, everything about, their business interests, their lives, and this, that. I know my parents certainly did not.
Yeah.
And
and I'm not involved in their, it's not like I'm in the family business, so.
How do you know? But the point is, here, I mean, look, I have a certain amount of sympathy for the difficulties that are placed on a child, particularly an only child, of politically prominent, global celebrity parents. It's going to be pretty tough on you to do what she went through going through the White House, and I got sympathy, especially, let's leave out the scandals.
People made a lot of fun of Chelsea.
Right, let's leave all that out and just say,
teenager.
she knew enough, she's a health professional, she's got a PhD, we won't go into it, in health, we'll say. But she went down there and she was at a moment where she was getting her PhD. I don't think she got it until 2013 or so. We've talked in the past about Haiti, our last recent broadcast. Here's a quick link to it. And if we could just pull up this link here. This is a good one. I mean, though I did write it. It does go a little bit more into the Haiti set of problems, and people who are interested, you can read this at your leisure.
And that's on charlesortel.com.
It is. So if we go back into the next page. All right, we're getting close to the end here.
Well, that's sad.
People talk about private gain and annulment, and what they don't talk enough about is embezzlement. And that's where I think we're going to catch these people, on embezzlement. Mm-hmm. So private gain is when you operate a charity, you're supposed to be engaged in not-for-profit activities. Private gain is not simply money that you earn out of the net earnings of a foundation.
Caviar at the wedding counts?
It's expense reimbursement that's not justified. It's flying around in a private jet when you should be on JetBlue. It's going on trips you shouldn't be on. It's taking, it's expenses, restaurant meals and stuff you shouldn't be doing. They make a big point of saying, well, Hillary and Bill and Chelsea don't take a bean of salary. Not one bean of salary.
What about all the speeches that they're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars to
or
do?
The laureate compensation, or maybe expenses being defrayed that should have been paid out of personal after-tax money but are paid by the foundation. So there's a very, very good lengthy document. If we could just hit that one link at the top there.
Not to go in reverse, Charles, but when Bill says something like no money from the Clinton Foundation was used to pay for Chelsea's wedding, is he hiding the fact that, money went to the foundation and then he went on Laureate and the $17 million from Laureate or something like that was used to pay for the wedding?
This is a person who would debate the meaning of the word is.
Right.
So, just let's have a real person, a grounded, centered person who hasn't been impeached for lying under oath and obstructing justice, review the facts and tell us what they think with reference to some real links and evidence that we can double check ourselves. What Bill Clinton says, go on the comedy circuit, not interested.
Why was he not facing some sort of, impeached, as Lionel says, is just accusing him of that, right? Charging him.
Right, it's akin to an indictment.
So, but why didn't he get punished for that?
He did get punished for that.
Oh, he lost his law degree.
Yeah, his Arkansas and Supreme Court law license, and he had to pay, close to $1 million in fines.
Okay.
This is an interesting document. We won't go through it at all. It's way too long. But it came out on April 20th, 2005, which was just around the time that the Clinton Foundation amended its bylaws But if you just go through, when our Congress decides to do something, look at the length of this document, just the table of contents, right? You have a tremendous amount of information and background here. You want to read up on what's the difference between a public charity or private foundation, go to page 82. You want to understand what real exempt purposes are, go to page 61.
Wow.
And it's all laid out for you here. And in addition, there's a wonderful history, which takes you back into ancient times as to how this is a 248-page document, okay, prepared by our government and free. So, you want to discuss whether this is an infraction or not? After you read this document, let me know and we'll talk about it.
Wow.
So
yeah, that's like bathroom reading.
It's good reading. It's quite interesting, actually. Pretty well done. So if we go back into the body, now this is a little one. Again, I'd like to have us hit that link if you don't mind.
This one?
Yeah, this one here. Okay. This would appear to be a little problematic. An employee shall not use his public office for his own private gain, for the endorsement of any product, service, or enterprise, or for the private gain of friends, relatives, or persons with whom the employee is affiliated in a non-governmental capacity, including what, Jason?
Nonprofit organizations.
Of which the employee is an officer or member, and persons with whom the employee has or seeks employment or business relations. This would appear to be a sweeping regulation that would doom the Clinton Foundation once people woke up.
But it depends on what your definition of his is.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Because this would obviate any problem with her doing it.
Right, exactly. I don't think so.
Right.
So that's just one little regulation to file away. It goes on and on and on, but I mean, just a quick view there is you're just done. Okay, but then here's background memo from the IRS, and here you see any transaction between an organization and a private individual in which the individual appears to receive a disproportionate share of the benefits of the exchange relative to the charity served presents an enormous issue. Such transactions may include assignments of income, speeches, compensation arrangements, sales or exchanges of property, commissions, Eagle Vale, Summit Rock, rental arrangements, that condo, gifts with retained interests, and contracts to provide goods or services to the organization. So this is an area where, normally speaking, the IRS and the states rely on trustees to understand their solemn duties, their duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, to declare their conflicts. If instead you're going to say, I got it, I'll have all kinds of conflicts that I'm not going to tell you about it, then I'm in the clear, right? You got to go back through this history. And then this is an interesting one. I hadn't actually focused on embezzlement, but the California State Guide, and Xavier Becerra, the Attorney General of California, and your deputy, you're probably busy right now explaining to somebody, I hope,
why he hired the Awan brothers
and why
did
the
away
two
with
of them,
the server.
Why the two of them did.
Yeah.
And whether the Awan brothers were servicing the Clinton Foundation, the Hillary Clinton electronic devices is an interesting question.
I do believe there was a connection there.
There could have been.
She was adamant on using those BlackBerries, and Imran was a real expert at hacking them.
Right. So we just learned, this is a question from this brochure, we just learned that an employee embezzled substantial funds from our charity. What can we do about it? And it says, basically, you better hop right on it. You can't use a charity as a slush fund. You can't use a charity as an argument to just send unencumbered cash towards bank accounts so you can scoop into the kitty car, and buy maybe a place in Ireland or a place in the Dominican Republic or who knows what.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of obvious that a charity cannot have unencumbered cash, because then you could just say, hey, I'm raising money to cure cancer, and then use it to buy food for yourself. It's
right, exactly.
Kind of changing the purpose.
And to put a fine point on it, why are the declared travel expenses for this charity so high?
First class.
Well, but the charity is supposed to operate. It's supposed to operate a library and research facility in Little Rock. You shouldn't be spending tens of millions of dollars a year on travel expenses. But what are they going on the space shuttle?
You got to fly places.
I mean, you know, it's
like
ridiculous.
nice jets and hotel rooms and whatnot.
And we put this link up in the past, but if we just hit this link here, this is, you want to understand Arkansas law? You know, maybe it's evolved since this thing was printed in 2011. Maybe the laws changed a little bit, but here's a pretty good free guide that lays it out for you.
Forward by Vince Foster.
So, you know, it's all there for you. And I picked this version because we're talking about, you know, were funds possibly leaking out of, resources leaking out of the Clinton Foundation in 2010 when Chelsea was married in Rhinebeck in an opulent ceremony, you know, heavily benefiting from George Soros' connection in the town where he has a big estate.
Oh,
in
really?
Rhinebeck. Of course. So if we go back into the presentation, to the next page, okay. We're going to see this Nunes memo.
Yeah, I think Monday.
I hope. And earlier this morning, President Trump had a tweet saying, you know, just change the rules. Go to a 51% vote. If these people are going to stall forever, go to a 51% vote.
Was that what he meant by the nuclear option?
Right. Now, that is, you know, of course, Mitch McConnell and others were saying, well, it's risky, you know, because if you lose in 2018, go all in, you change these rules, and the Senate switches,
Then you're out of business.
then you're potentially in trouble. But, you know, maybe you should take that risk. Maybe it's a calculated risk. Maybe with the tax bill coming together and beginning to benefit people so much across the heartland. And recently in that, I saw a hilarious, I don't know if I sent it to you, CNN thing where they thought they'd be really clever. We're going to go out to, I forget where it was, Ohio or somewhere, and we're going to go to interview Democratic Trump voters and see how they feel 1 year later.
They're probably happier.
And they loved it. They were all saying.
I got to say, I feel like support for Trump has increased since, you know, in the past year. What do you think about that? Do we have any data to support that?
Well, I mean, I would say I agree with you. I mean, I think the way I put it is the resistance is so corny and so scripted. I mean, they knew it ahead, 1 year anniversary of Trump's inauguration. It's a good time for protests. Let's do these stupid protests with it. We won't get into what kind of hats.
But it seemed less enthusiastic, the march this year. And also, I think there's got to be a bunch of people who sort of like just watch the news or heard the news or just think Trump is like a billionaire blowhard or would have didn't like him. And now if they're like, whoa, wait a minute, I have a job now or my stocks are doing better or whatever, maybe they're like, we haven't had a war yet, so maybe he's not so bad.
Well, and they haven't seen the full impact of this.
Haven't had a war here yet.
we haven't seen the full impact of the tax bill. When for people who are on a salary, when this tax bill comes through, when the new withholding tables hit, you know, in terms of numbers, forget the rich people who are in East Hampton or Aspen or wherever they are this weekend. You know, the mass of humanity, the salaried worker who's making $50,000 a year per worker, is going to see a big increase in after-tax take-home pay. And when you know, of course, the double standard was when Barack Obama amended the tax code and the average benefit was $40 a person. Nancy Pelosi's like, that's fantastic. What a great job. Here you're talking $1,000. In extra pay from a company, and then we haven't even gotten through the impact of what's going to happen on your withholdings as you look through this bill for the people making, you know, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 jobs, which are the overwhelming number of people, you know, who are eking out in existence trying to make ends meet.
I think a lot of people also appreciate this notion that cutting corporate tax is not necessarily specifically geared towards making billionaires richer, but preventing companies from leaving the United States because of the inequity in corporate tax as compared with other countries. So I think, you know, even the average person that I speak to appreciates and understands that and thinks that's kind of a good idea.
And it's also a silly point as well because corporations don't actually pay taxes. The customers pay the taxes. It's a cost of doing business, right? You put it into the cost of your product or service, the corporate tax. So to argue that, you know, we ought to
makes it more expensive to manufacture stuff in the United States.
I think that corporations do use government services, benefit from government services, so they should chip into the pot of government services, but to think that there's a simple solution that will just tax these evil corporations, and meanwhile let the charitable sector run riot,
Yeah.
there's something wrong there. And what I think people will see, they vote with their pocketbook.
Yeah.
They're going to see a lot of benefits economically, assuming we're not distracted by a war or an assault or whatever. Now, the other thing that's going to happen here, this Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the geriatric wing, and I say that as a rising member of the geriatric class, is looking increasingly ever more foolish. And I think there's a very high degree of likelihood that Nancy Pelosi will lose her spot as minority leader in the House. And Chuck Schumer is going to fold like the cheap suits he wears. Maybe they're not that cheap, but
he's terrible.
He's going to fold so quickly. This is just brutalizing him. And the Democratic position is a stupid position. Now, I don't know that I had that link.
Oh, that's what I just clicked on. Never mind.
Sorry. It's okay. Yeah, that. Anyway, the Horowitz report is coming out. That's the IG, the top dog IG.
Very interested in
That'll
that.
come out soon. And now this is interesting. This is a link from NBC News, that May 25th, 2016. I mean, was there any coverage of this? Did this catch fire going into Memorial Day weekend?
Definitely no. I mean, the overwhelming majority of people that I speak to still think it's ridiculous to be talking about, I shouldn't say the overwhelming majority, but a shockingly huge number of people still think there's nothing wrong with the email server.
I know. Amazing. So we go back into it. Now, President Trump's about to go to Davos.
Yeah.
And, we have our friend Ted Malloch, who's got a book. We've got to interview him, actually, on his book. But he was the chief operating officer of Davos, and he wrote a book basically just throwing Davos to the wolves. This unregulated globalism makes no sense, as we've talked about before. I think there's a high degree of likelihood that Donald Trump will get over there. Look how many, 780 Americans are going to go to Davos. How come this isn't a more fairly distributed, this is an unequal distribution of attendees, right? China and India are far bigger than the United States and the UK. They have less than 250 total. We have over 1,000 total.
Why is that?
What's wrong with that picture? Because wealth is not equally distributed around the world.
So Charles, for people who maybe don't know what goes on at Davos, what can you tell us about it in a general sense?
I only know from reading about it, but it's a conclave. It's extremely expensive to go there. It's I don't know what the ticket is for your admission, but then you got to pay incidental expenses.
But I mean, what happens at this World Economic Forum?
It's like it's
just a confab where rich people get together and
rub
elbows?
It's an international version of the Clinton Grifters Initiative. I mean, and actually Bill Clinton went out there with Doug Band before they decided to create the Clinton Grifter Initiative, Global Initiative. It's the same idea. You get people in a closed setting, you bring in existing and former world leaders, then you bring in the powerhouse investors and the bankers and the law firms and the industrialists, and you have glue wine and you have whatever. What is that stuff that they have in
prostitutes?
Yeah, I bet you they have some of that. But in Switzerland, they have different types of special meals. You have all that. Good wine there, actually. And discussions, and you go to conferences on general topics of the future of the universe and all that kind of stuff.
Like a lot of nonsense.
Well, but you get to hobnob and you go on TV and there are parties and
Yes, right. It's the parties and hanging out.
Right. And some people take this very, very seriously. Academic types take it very, very seriously, and I'm sure that some productive things come out of it, but it's basically an opportunity to get together and hobnob and, increase your web of connections.
So what do you see the value, or what's the significance of President Trump going to this?
I think, it makes no sense for him to go to it. And indeed, even Bill Clinton said in one of the books, I forget which book it was or article, where Bill went with Doug Band to this thing, and supposedly on the way back he said, we can do this. Why do we need Davos?
It's the inspiration for a massive fraud.
So a good reason for Donald Trump to do this would be to do exactly what he did when he visited the NATO building,
Just tell them, hey, this is all ending.
Yeah, about this unregulated globalism, really nice to be here. Now I have a list of all the attendees. We're going to put that list of you 780 people into our system just to make sure that you're complying with the charity laws and the tax laws and the other laws that do apply here, and that you're not necessarily using a charity to advance your personal interest, Doug Band. Do I see you there in the audience?
So he may be going there
I'm just
specifically to piss in the punch bowl.
As it were. Yeah.
We'll keep our eyes open for that.
Yeah. So there are some rumors. I know various people have been following this mysterious Q.
Yeah, QAnon.
Right. But in the past, I've put this up before, and I'm sure you're going to go to Q. Okay. In the case of Q, I just put this up as a link. I am not able to follow how this actually works, but this is a site.
GitHub.
That people are trying to interpret. And this site, if you see here, the shot heard around the world, the Great Awakening, a week to remember, something big is happening this coming week, I think. Now, and I don't draw my views on Q. I draw my views on the work that I've been doing with you, Jason, and others, that I think there's a golden opportunity for Donald Trump to take on the Clinton Foundation and the swamp, juxtaposing Corinne Brown walking to whatever prison she's going to walk into on the 29th, a week from Monday, with wherever Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton are and Chelsea Clinton are on the same day. There's a great PR opportunity. And if you're going to go bust down Paul Manafort's house, the way they did with a frightened wife and storm it with these FBI agents early in the morning.
She could have been killed. Anybody busts into your house with guns, that's dangerous.
Right. Well, there's no risk of guns being in the Clinton house. Yeah. But anyway, this is a site. People smarter than I, with more time than I may have, will be able to figure out what this really means. It could be nothing, could be something. There's a lot of chatter typically on what Q is dropping.
Well,
and
it's weird. GitHub, as I understood it, is a place for sharing like source code for open source projects. So I'm not sure why QAnon information would be there, but we could ask Quinn Michaels or somebody who knows more about this kind of stuff, and they would probably know.
Yeah. So we close the main part of the presentation with this. I know there are people out there who think that Thomas Jefferson was a jerk, and others who thought that Hillary was a better Secretary of State than Thomas Jefferson. But this is a very interesting quote from a book that I believe was published around 1782 or thereabouts. So this is in the crucial Articles of Confederation period, when, before we had a constitution. He was, I think, the envoy to France. The French government said, hey, what's going on with this new country of yours? They sent a brochure, and Thomas Jefferson answered it, and it became a book.
He was a Francophile.
He was definitely, he became a Francophile over there. And he really, when you read this book, I think it is the only book that he wrote. It's not that long.
Huh.
And it's called, I think it's The Present State of Virginia, or History, it's something like The Present State of Virginia.
Pre-McAuliffe. Pre-McAuliffe.
Pre-Terry McAuliffe? Yeah. Well, actually, one of my ancestors wrote a book earlier than that, on the first book on the state of Virginia, Robert Beverly.
What foretell happened? Was that?
No, it's called, guy's name was Robert Beverly. My ancestor was Major General Robert Beverly. This is Robert Beverly, the son, wrote the book. My ancestor is Harry Beverly. Huh. But this is a great thing. And think about it. He wrote this in 1780, let's say, 82. Our rulers will become corrupt, our people careless. A single zealot may commence persecutor, and better men be his victims. Boy, does that ring true. And then, writing in 1782, he looked all the way ahead and he said, the shackles, therefore, which shall not be knocked off at the conclusion of this war, i.e. the Revolutionary War, will remain on us long, will be made heavier and heavier, till our rights shall revive or expire in a convulsion. And I think what we're seeing in this country, under Donald Trump and with Bernie Sanders, is exactly that, a convulsion, a peaceful convulsion, where we're seeing, the agitators yesterday and today, certain set of views. We're seeing Trump supporters, a different set of views, but we're not accepting the status quo. And I think we're now in the process, I hope, of throwing off these shackles that were put on us in 1989. But I have one more slide left.
Oh,
actually.
I didn't realize that. I was going to ask you if you thought the convulsions were the result of the vomiting being induced by that photo of Hillary and Barack Obama.
So we don't generally do this, but because this is so important, and this will be the last weekend that Corinne Brown faces, pre-reporting to prison, on next Sunday at 3 p.m., we're going to do a special edition, and we don't generally give away the title as much. This is Racket Man, modeled on Music Man. And one of the key things for Music Man is the song You've Got Trouble. And we are here now to tell you, Mr. President, Mr. Racket Man, you've got serious trouble.
Bill Clinton.
We start that the foundation, of the Clinton Charity Network is blatant fraud, which somehow was missed by James Comey and Robert Mueller in an investigation that went from 2001 to 2005. Here's the link to that investigation, members of the Crowdsource community. Read it.
Sorry, you don't want to show it?
No, it's okay. But read it for yourselves. There's a tremendous amount of information in here, and particularly Robin Gritz, if you're watching this and your FBI friends, you can tell us what's missing here. And you can explain to us, perhaps in another presentation, why they didn't get the Clinton Foundation back when the FBI and a grand jury, multiple grand juries, were looking at it back in 2001 to 2005. James Comey and Robert Mueller have a lot of explaining to do here.
Oh, Lordy.
Yeah. And if we go back, yeah. All right, so one thing that the focus of of Racket Man is going to be a detailed analysis of the financial statements showing you the fraud that's obvious from the public information. And we have different people around the world who've been commenting on this, but I'll lay it out, I hope, assuming I have time this coming week, in great detail. We will show you, there's no question this was a massive fraud. There's no question the building must have been complete well before the many papers and artifacts went into the building. You don't take 8 years of a presidency's presidential records and put them into a building with dust everywhere and plaster being put together and hammer and nails and all this kind. You just don't do that. So the building was clearly finished. The question is, how much before November 18th, 2004? As a guess, it was probably pretty much ready to go to receive artifacts by April 1st, 2004, maybe sometime in April 2004. So the team on the ground had to know that the building portion of it was largely done, and when they were making representations to the National Archives, to the House of Representatives, to the Senate, to lenders, to their state regulators, to the IRS, to all sorts of people, they had to know that that the thing was already morphing into an international organization where they hadn't disclosed their activities. They had to know all that. And there's a correspondence file that's rich here that the investigators are going to tease out. Now, they brought their own daughter into the center of this mess. If you go, we don't need to pull it up, but Chelsea Clinton, theatrically was given the keys to whatever was transferred over to the National Archives on 18 November 2004. Their young daughter, that was 14 years ago, so she's in her 20s
Wow,
now,
yeah.
is given the keys, and she, brightly hands them over to the archivist. And just stop here for a second. The Clinton Library and Archives contains nearly 2 million photographs, 80 million pages of records, 79,000 gifts, 21 million email messages. You're telling me, that wasn't just put into the Clinton Foundation in a day, right? It would take a lot of time to archive all that, position it properly, make sure you have the right, these are the presidential records. And they weren't a gift from the Clinton family to the United States. They were a gift of, we the people allowed these records to temporarily be under the custody and control of the Clinton family as they sifted through and decided, what would be in the archive. This is a lot of stuff, and there's got to be a record here of when these documents, photographs, pages, etc., when were they shipped to Little Rock, by whom, where were they stored? Is this indeed all of the presidential records, or had some gone missing? And we go back into the presentation. And then we hit, before we hit the next link that I'm going to tell you about, in 2004, when they granted the gift of a partial interest in this Little Rock mess, which it was by that time a mess, they had to say that grant was what's called the crucial program expense. The value of that grant was $36 million. The value of the endowment was deemed to be $36 million, inaccurately. The value of the endowment was deemed to be $7.2 million. That's $43.2. And the total program expenses from memory were like $46 million. So everything other than the Little Rock thing was $2-3 million. Okay?
The Little Rock, you mean the actual building?
Right. So here are the economic benefits if we look at this impact analysis quote here. Next one down.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Okay. This goes through, this is done in hindsight, October 2004. It's a lengthy document, I forget how many pages. But in essence, it claims that many hundreds of millions of dollars were created. Because what this Clinton Foundation did is they took a derelict portion of, I think, North Little Rock. Here we go. The depressed surrounding warehouse district has been reinvigorated, and downtown Little Rock is suddenly the place to be. The same article said in 1999 that $800 million had already been invested in new downtown development since the Clinton Center site was chosen. Right? And so, I mean...
So wait a minute. So you're telling me that downtown Little Rock
North Little Rock was derelict.
But it's this place where the Clinton Foundation is?
Right.
It looks like it's in the middle of the woods.
Well, no comment.
Oh.
But so the point here is that these presidential libraries, one should ask the question, do we need yet another library?
With a golf course on the roof.
And a massage parlor. But do we need yet another library, whether it be Barack Obama's in Chicago, or is it time to think more sensibly about this and say, no, wait a minute, presidential records really, can we trust people who would write checks for a $165 million facility and accept accounting that didn't work, and trustees who were conflicted, and all sorts of derelict defects in the record? Can we accept that team having responsibility for sitting on top of the facility that's going to house records of we the people for 100 years?
Well, the other thing I would ask is 165, I mean, what if you made it for like 65 million and gave 100 million to all the derelicts in downtown Arkansas? Would that help people more?
Right. But if we could just go back to that page, if that's all right.
Sure. The report, you mean?
No, the actual text. So the standard for annulment and private gain is whether the collective amount of private gain created through the operation of a charity exceeds $1,000, you have a problem. Here we have them saying it's 800 million, right? And was this whole project a scheme to allow politically connected people on the right and the left in Little Rock an opportunity while Bill is president to snap up derelict lots?
Well, that's what they did with Whitewater.
With Whitewater, and it's arguably what people did with the Texas Ranger Stadium, and it's not just a Democrat thing.
They're not that creative, right? They're like, we'll buy this crappy land, we'll build an off-ramp on the highway, then we'll put houses on the land. And
Probably there's a cattle futures trading operation in here somewhere. But if we go, what we're going to do next week is we are going to take you through 4 elements of a diversion here. We're going to do it with Stuart Dean, who's a repeat guest, who's a distinguished lawyer of Cahill Gordon, a fine firm, then Citibank, not so fine a bank.
I don't like Citibank.
But Stuart is a very good, fair-minded person, retired, and we're going to, with him, take you through the record and show that the first problem is that in 2004, they took a grant that they claim on the tax forms was a cash grant when it wasn't a cash grant of $36 million. And that allowed them to divert $36 million from the books.
What do you mean a cash grant? So who's got $36 million in actual cash?
All right, so if you take out your wallet and you give me $36 million in cash, right, wallet. You may notice the difference.
Yeah.
And it hurts, right, because it's cash. But if you then give me an interest in the future profits of the next 6 movies that you might do, by way of a contract, which you argue is worth $36 million, that's a non-cash grant. That's not, you're not giving me cash. You're giving me
commitment to
something that we're going to say you negotiate might be worth $36 million. So in the financial books and records that accountants are tracking, you're tracking the movement of the cash. So if you call something a cash expense when it's not a cash expense, that is not a small error. That is flagrant fraud.
Yeah.
All right. And typically the first thing that forensic accountants do is they say, show me all the bank accounts related to this venture. I don't care about your financial statements. I just want to see the bank accounts, the movement of cash. And from that, they can tell what's going on. So you falsely characterize the largest expense in your year 2004 as a cash expense when it's not, and then take the additional step of continuing the practice of not producing a cash flow statement, which would flag this, which is required to be produced. Okay, you're in deep trouble. So there's 36 million. The second is that they falsely claimed that they had borrowed $28 million by December 31st, 2003, when that is not the case. They borrowed it on February 20th, 2004 in two separate loans, which I would argue are probably were not validly taken out. In one case, they claimed that they borrowed roughly $2 million to redo a museum store, when the truth is, in the missing audit that we have, in quotes, that the $2 million was used to buy a building. And you can't go to a bank and say, give me $2 million to remodel my store, when what you're really doing is buying a building. And you can't use incoming foundation grants that were supposed to be for a library and a research facility to buy some building over here. And then you certainly can't say, you know what, even though GAAP, General Accepted Accounting Principles or Standards, if you want to call them that, requires that I use accrual-based accounting. If I make a pledge, you know, I've got to discount the future value of the pledge, and I've got to, you can't say you're going to not do that, right? And that you're not going to keep track of your pledges, but then say that the way in which you got $26 million in a line of credit was by going to Bank of America and getting them to issue you a line of credit secured by the pledges that you don't account for. That's something you can't do, but that's something they did do.
Yeah, apparently you can.
So that's $64 million in 2004, a crucial year. Just those two steps would disqualify you. And they didn't disclose any of these problems to any state, any foreign power, the IRS, or anywhere. That's 2004. In 2000, the third element is in 2006, they went and they restated the results for 2004. But they did that inaccurately. And they did that to try to cover up steps 1 and 2, and also, I think, to try to cover up problems that occurred with fake construction bills. So when you compare declarations in the 990s, year by year, you're supposed to declare the large payments you make to independent contractors. When you do the work that I've done, and you look at 2001, they began work in 2001, 2, 3, and 4, you can see the relationship between the sum of those large payments and the change in the recorded value of construction in progress. And you can see that the identified amounts account for 90+% of the movement in that account, construction in progress. But then in 2004 and afterwards, there's an unexplained gigantic variance. How would that happen? You would pad the expenses. You would say that it cost you a lot more to build this site than it really did.
Like 165 million.
Right, instead of the 100 or so that it really cost, and you would steal that money. All right, and that would create problems if your contractor was a joint venture called CDI, Clark Dillard's Incorporated, that was a division of a publicly traded company that had to actually make truthful disclosures. And if you had an honest CFO who say, now wait a minute, you know,
something's wrong.
Something's wrong here, and started asking all kinds of questions. And if that
dirt napped that guy.
And if that guy actually, yes, in January of 2008, you know, disappeared under unexpected circumstances, and I think here we want to hit this link. The potential root causes of why this Clinton Library Builders CFO disappeared amid an audit.
I was joking.
I wasn't joking.
I didn't realize that
I'm
happened.
a serious person.
I know. These are serious people, Charles.
But note when this happened. Okay, he disappears in January of 2000, January 28th of 2008.
Oh,
now,
yes, John Glasgow, of course. We've spoken about him before.
Yeah, but what happened in January of 2008?
Did they build the...
Hillary was beginning to learn that she was going to suffer a serious defeat at the hands of one Barack Obama.
Right. Oh, right.
So she was losing. The campaign was hemorrhaging money. It needed money. And, and this guy's case of John Glasgow's missing, his remains were uncovered in 2015, I want to say also in March. Just as Hillary geared up again.
Wow.
So, this whole area of foundation fraud is an area which, long ago I decided we really needed to look at very carefully. Thank you for giving me all this time and the platform to go into it. But, we've reached the nut-cutting time here, where there is an FBI investigation, there is an IRS investigation. Maybe the Australian government will decide they need some of their money back. Maybe the Norwegian government, the French government, the UK government,
Swedish.
Dutch, German, Italian, Swiss, New Zealand. Maybe some of these people are going to get off a dime. But if they don't get off a dime, they're going to be even more embarrassed than they will if they do get off a dime. If they do get off a dime, they're going to have to admit that people close to these various governments have been using the Clinton Foundation as a way to direct foreign taxpayer money to an unregulated pot where you can leak back to the various players. And in certain cases, some of these people, the Tony Blairs of this world, other people, Trudeau in Canada, others in Norway and elsewhere have created similar style foundations.
Yeah.
And,
It's trending.
It's trending, exactly. So Donald Trump, good timing for him to be in Davos. I hope he makes an issue of some of this. And I hope and thank the line people in the FBI and the Department of Justice who are not crooked like Mr. Orr, who are not crooked like the names who will be exposed in the Nunes memo and the related disclosures out of Horowitz. I hope there will be a convulsion, a peaceful convulsion, where these crooks who've been stuck in there probably 89 forward, maybe 93 forward, are exposed, they're forced to leave, they're punished, an example set of them, the lowest learners of this world as well in the IRS, and we can rid ourselves of these shackles, as Thomas Jefferson described them, that are heavily sitting on our shoulders.
And Charles, do you have confidence in Michael Horowitz? We recently had an interview with Dr. Stephen, who was talking about Inspector General Horowitz, and it was largely met with positive response, but now just lately there is an alternate Thomas Paine that I've become aware of who says that Michael Horowitz is maybe not so good. What do we think about Michael Horowitz?
We're going to see the evidence, and if he does not, I was emailing back and forth. Joe DeGeneva has a great thing that I was discussing with him this morning by email. There's a real record here, and if Horowitz does not cover, for example, the referral, the IG referral on the 6th of July 2015, are you listening? 6th of July 2015, get that report. We need to see that report. If he doesn't even reference that report, if he doesn't reference Clinton Foundation issues, we'll know he's in the tank. Okay, but my suspicion is, and what I've been hearing, and again, we're going to find out, so we don't really need to guess, my suspicion is that he really could be a man of principle, a person of principle. And there are people like that. I know many people like that who they just are really all in for being a lawyer. They love the law. They love the long history of justice.
But just simply not a criminal. I know a lot of people like that too.
but at the other end, people who are real sticklers.
Right,
And this guy, for example, Cody Highland, who is the U.S. attorney in Little Rock, is supposedly somebody who, he doesn't care whether you're a Republican, Democrat, apolitical, whatever. What he cares about the facts, the law, whether an investigation of the facts, comparison to the laws, suggests that you broke laws and that the prosecution would have a chance to win an indictment and then a conviction at trial. That's all he cares about. And if that's all he cares about, game over.
And what do you think is the point at which the Clintons decide, hey, this particular guy needs to get killed? Like nobody's pushed a button on you yet. And
Well, thanks for that, Jason.
I'm glad for that.
So I'm
just,
glad too.
I like this guy who was the CFO of the construction company. Why do they kill him? Why not?
Well, see, who knows if he was killed or it was a tragic accident? It certainly looks suspicious. But I think, back pre-November 8th, 2016, a betting person, those Irish bookies and everybody else were convinced, that we wouldn't be doing this show right now because
Hillary would be president.
Right. And they got it wrong.
Right.
And so it was logic back then suggested, you're not going to bet against the Clintons. Perhaps what we did was foolish, betting against the Clintons. But now I don't, things happen out of spite and by accident and stuff like that. But I don't think the Clintons, the Clintons are under, I would guess they're under surveillance, frankly. It wouldn't shock me that they're wiretapped.
Well, they should be. All you got to do is apparently make up something and go to the FISA court, and then you can wiretap whoever you want.
No, a legitimate domestic wiretap.
They certainly, well, if there's a criminal investigation into their activities by the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, I would think that surveilling them is within the purview of doing that.
Right, and I would also think, you're looking at Donald Trump. This isn't Donald Trump's, third year. So he's potentially a lame duck, and like HW won't win. He's only 1 year, against great odds. I never answered that question. Against great odds, with a battery of negative press. Nonetheless, his approval rating is at 43% right now. That's amazing to me. It's not like with Obama, it was kind of like that movie Being There with Peter Sellers, when
Chauncey the gardener.
Chauncey the gardener, like he couldn't say anything wrong, right? It's a front belly. Sounds like your garden. Gardens grow. Oh, let's make him president.
So, 43% approval rating, it's obviously pretty low. How have other presidents done at the end of year one?
In the case of Ronald Reagan, I don't know the specific answer, but I do remember that in the first year of Ronald Reagan's presidency, it was misery for him. The economy was still hemorrhaging. Interest rates spiked, at their all-time peak. Stock market, believe it or not,
we were having inflation then, right?
Huge inflation, and it was just carnage everywhere. Cities were in distress. Debts were out of control. And he was extremely unpopular. He got shot.
And then everybody loved him.
Well, and then, I don't think...
But that was only March. That was just a few months into his presidency.
Wasn't that the second year?
I thought it was just a few months in, because that was sort of, George Bush figured it worked so well with Kennedy, why not just kill this guy? And then
No, go on.
I can be... the Hinckley family was... George Bush was having, breakfast with John Hinckley Sr. the day that assassination attempt occurred.
I'm all in for looking back at the H.W. Bush and W. Bush scandals. I'm all in for that. I think it's high time to do that. I'm not an expert on that area, so I don't...
March 30th, 1981. So that would have been just 3 months after he was inaugurated that took place.
And then I
remember seeing that on TV as a kid. I was like,
I remember too. Not as a kid.
It's actually not funny. James Brady was, paralyzed by that. And then just in 2017, I believe, John Hinckley Jr. was released from prison, wasn't he?
Right, and I think the historical revision is that not Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan's health position was far graver than the country knew at the time. Not the Alzheimer's.
After being shot.
Yeah, he was. That was rough.
Close to the edge.
Right, but anyway, that sort of concludes what I have to say. And
very good.
I guess we didn't hear from.
Well, there were a couple people that were going to call in. Thomas Paine has the flu.
Oh.
People have been saying on the news that the flu is everywhere, and of course, CVS wants you to get a flu shot. I personally don't go for those flu shots. And then we were going to try to also hear from Laura Loomer. She's there in Vegas with there's a protest of Sheriff Lombardo, but unfortunately I guess they're both busy. So we're going to have to catch up with that later. Charles, thank you very much for yet another comprehensive presentation.
My
I'll
great
take
pleasure.
this opportunity once again to remind everyone that Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored information source, and we will not take corporate advertisers. We're not interested in being controlled by large moneyed organizations. It's critically important to me that Crowdsource the Truth remains sponsored by small individual sponsors, and that means our viewers who are out there watching the program every day or even once a week. I really hope people will consider becoming regular monthly sponsors on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Even a small sponsorship payment, something between $1 and $10 a month, goes a long, long way, and will keep these broadcasts coming. Charles, have a wonderful evening, and I will see you next Sunday.
You too.
Thanks for watching, everybody.